Challenging Freud with Feminist Psychology. Karen Horney was a pioneering figure in the world of psychology whose ideas reshaped the understanding of human behavior and development, especially from a feminist perspective. She emerged during a time when the field was dominated by the theories of Sigmund Freud, whose views on women and gender were widely accepted but increasingly questioned. Horney's contributions not only challenged Freud's male-centered perspective, but also introduced a more balanced, humanistic approach to psychoanalysis. Her work opened the door to a more inclusive psychological framework, one that recognized cultural and social influences as powerful forces in shaping personality. Born in Germany in 1885, Horney was drawn to medicine and psychology at a time when women in academia faced numerous societal barriers. Despite these obstacles, she pursued her education and trained in Freudian psychoanalysis. However, she began to develop concerns about Freud's core assumptions, particularly his theories regarding female psychology. Freud's concept of penis envy, which suggested that women inherently felt inferior due to their biological differences from men, seemed to Horney both reductive and inaccurate. She believed that such theories were more reflective of the cultural attitudes of the time rather than genuine psychological truths. Horney argued that Freud's theories were overly focused on biology and failed to account for the social and cultural conditions that influence human development. Instead of accepting that women were passive or incomplete versions of men, Horney proposed that feelings of inferiority in women stemmed not from anatomy, but from societal structures and expectations. She introduced the idea of womb envy, a counterpoint to Freud's penis envy, suggesting that some men might feel envious of women's ability to bear children and nurture life. While this was not meant to be taken as a direct inversion of Freud's concept, it highlighted how cultural values and gender roles could be misinterpreted as biological destinies. Through this, Horney emphasized the importance of understanding individuals in the context of their society and relationships. Horney's critique of Freud was bold and unprecedented. She didn't just reject his ideas outright, but offered alternative theories that highlighted the complexity of human emotions and experiences. Her vision of psychoanalysis was more optimistic and centered on the belief that people had the capacity for growth and self-realization. While Freud often portrayed human behavior as driven by unconscious conflicts and repressed desires, Horney saw personality as shaped significantly by environmental and interpersonal dynamics. She posited that anxiety and neurosis were not inevitable outcomes of internal sexual conflict, but rather responses to feelings of isolation, helplessness, and insecurity in a hostile world. Central to Horney's theory was the concept of basic anxiety, an emotion she described as stemming from early childhood experiences of feeling unloved or unwanted. According to her, children develop coping strategies to deal with this anxiety, and these strategies eventually shape their personalities. Some may become compliant, seeking approval from others. Others may become aggressive, striving for power and control, while others may withdraw and become detached. Unlike Freud, who believed early childhood experiences were largely sexual in nature, Horney emphasized the role of security, love, and affirmation. Her ideas thus resonated more with people who found Freud's theories too rigid and negative. Throughout her career, Horney emphasized the importance of self-awareness and inner strength. She believed that individuals could overcome their neuroses through introspection and by developing a true sense of self. Her therapeutic approach was less about uncovering repressed desires and more about helping people understand and change their patterns of behavior. She introduced the concept of the real self versus the idealized self. Many individuals, she argued, create an image of who they think they should be based on societal expectations. This false self becomes a source of conflict and dissatisfaction. The journey to mental health, according to Horney, involves shedding these illusions and embracing one's authentic self. In the context of feminist thought, Horney's work was groundbreaking, and she was one of the first psychologists to assert that the traditional theories of female development were biased and needed to be reconsidered. At a time when women's roles were largely confined to the domestic sphere, she provided intellectual validation for the idea that women's psychological experiences were distinct and worthy of study in their own right. Her writings encouraged future generations of psychologists to critically examine gender roles and to develop theories that reflected the diversity of human experience. Horney's departure from orthodox Freudian psychoanalysis led to significant professional challenges. She eventually moved to the United States, where she continued to write, teach, and practice. There, she established the American Institute for Psychoanalysis, a training ground for analysts interested in her more human-centered approach. While her ideas were initially met with resistance, especially from Freudian traditionalists, her influence gradually expanded. By advocating for a psychology that considered cultural, societal, and interpersonal dimensions, Horney laid the foundation for later developments in humanistic and feminist psychology. Her critiques were not born out of rebellion, but from deep reflection and a desire to make psychoanalysis more applicable and compassionate. She believed that a theory that did not account for the actual lived experiences of people, particularly women, was incomplete. Horney's commitment to empirical observation and her refusal to accept theories that did not align with reality gave her work a credibility that endured beyond her time. Her emphasis on the importance of culture also anticipated the later rise of cross-cultural psychology, which similarly questions universal psychological models and stresses the role of context. Karen Horney's work marked a turning point in psychological thought. By insisting that human behavior could not be understood solely through biological or instinctual drives, she broadened the scope of psychoanalysis and brought a new sensitivity to issues of gender, power, and personal growth. Her writings, including The Neurotic Personality of Our Time and Our Inner Conflicts, remain influential, offering insight into the complexities of identity and the struggle for self-understanding. These texts serve as testament to her belief that healing and change are possible through self-knowledge and honest engagement with one's inner world. Over time, her influence grew not only within clinical psychology, but also in feminist theory and social thought. She is now recognized as a trailblazer who challenged one of the most towering figures in psychology and did so with intellectual rigor and grace. Her critiques of Freud were not simply about disagreeing with a colleague. They represented a call for a more humane, inclusive, and realistic psychology. Her courage in confronting the orthodoxy of her day inspired others to question, received wisdom, and to pursue knowledge that genuinely reflected human diversity. Although Karen Horney passed away in 1952, her legacy lives on. Modern psychology continues to wrestle with questions she posed nearly a century ago. How much of who we are is shaped by our society? How do we construct our identities in a world filled with expectations? Can we change ourselves, or are we forever trapped by our past? Her belief in the possibility of transformation and growth remains a cornerstone of contemporary therapeutic practices. Many modern therapists, particularly those working from feminist, humanistic, or culturally sensitive frameworks, draw directly or indirectly from her insights. Today, her influence is visible not only in textbooks and academic discussions, but also in the way therapy is practiced and in the broader cultural understanding of mental health. Horney's ideas helped pave the way for a more nuanced and compassionate approach to understanding the self. She taught that individuals are not merely collections of drives and instincts, but complex beings shaped by relationships, culture, and aspirations. Her faith in the human capacity for change, coupled with her insistence on the dignity and worth of every person, continues to inspire. Karen Horney's life and work remind us that true progress often comes from those willing to challenge accepted norms with insight and integrity. In standing up to the dominant psychological models of her time, she not only reshaped her field, but also gave voice to countless others whose experiences had been overlooked or misunderstood. Through her vision, she offered an alternative path, one that embraced complexity, honored individuality, and called for a deeper understanding of the human spirit. B.F. Skinner and the Rise of Behaviorism. Burris Frederick Skinner, commonly known as B.F. Skinner, remains one of the most influential figures in the development of psychology, particularly in the field of behaviorism. Born in 1904 in Susquehanna, Pennsylvania, Skinner's journey into psychology began not with the mind of a scientist, but with the ambitions of a writer. After earning a degree in English literature at Hamilton College, he initially sought a career in writing. However, feeling unsatisfied with his progress and influenced by the writings of behavioral psychologist John B. Watson, Skinner turned his attention toward the scientific study of human behavior. This marked the beginning of a lifelong dedication to exploring the mechanisms of learning, motivation, and behavior through empirical, observable data rather than introspection. At a time when psychology was still grappling with abstract concepts of the unconscious and introspective analyses of the human mind, Skinner took a different path. He advocated for a rigorous, experimental approach rooted in observable behavior and its environmental determinants. Building on the foundational work of Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning and Edward Thorndike's law of effect, Skinner introduced the concept of operant conditioning, which would go on to reshape modern psychology. Where Pavlov's work focused on automatic responses to stimuli, Skinner emphasized voluntary behaviors and how they are influenced by their consequences. He introduced the term reinforcement to describe how behaviors are strengthened or weakened based on the outcomes they produce. Skinner's approach was methodical and data-driven. He developed the Skinner box, an experimental apparatus designed to observe animal behavior under controlled conditions. Inside the box, animals like rats or pigeons could be trained to perform certain actions, such as pressing a lever or pecking a disc, in exchange for a reward, typically food. This setup allowed Skinner to meticulously record patterns of behavior and understand how different types of reinforcement, positive, negative, or absent, affected the frequency of a behavior. Through countless experiments, he demonstrated that behavior could be shaped and maintained by systematically controlling reinforcement schedules. One of Skinner's most significant contributions to psychology was his delineation of reinforcement schedules, which outlined how varying the frequency and timing of rewards could influence the strength and persistence of a behavior. These schedules, fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval, proved crucial in understanding not only animal behavior but also human learning and motivation. For example, a variable ratio schedule where rewards are given after an unpredictable number of responses was found to produce high and steady rates of responding. This principle has since been applied widely, from educational settings to workplace productivity models, and even in understanding addictive behaviors such as gambling. Although Skinner worked extensively with animals, his ultimate interest lay in human behavior. He believed that the principles uncovered through animal research could be applied to people, asserting that all human actions, no matter how complex, could be understood through behaviorist principles. He was firm in his stance that internal thoughts and feelings, while real, were not the proper focus of scientific psychology unless they could be directly observed and measured. This perspective placed him at odds with other schools of thought, particularly psychoanalysis, which delved into unconscious motivations and subjective experiences. Skinner's theoretical framework found a practical outlet in his vision for social engineering through behavioral control. In his 1948 novel, Walden 2, he depicted a utopian society organized around behaviorist principles. In this fictional community, individuals were conditioned from birth to behave in socially desirable ways through positive reinforcement. The book was controversial, sparking debates over free will, autonomy, and the ethics of behavior modification. Yet it also inspired a generation of thinkers and educators to consider how environments could be structured to promote learning and cooperation without coercion or punishment. Throughout his career, Skinner remained a steadfast advocate of scientific rigor and objectivity. His influence extended into the field of education, where he championed programmed instruction, a method of teaching that involved small steps, immediate feedback, and reinforcement. He believed that students learn best when they receive immediate responses to their actions, allowing them to progress at their own pace while building mastery in a structured manner. This approach anticipated the development of computer-based learning and laid the groundwork for many educational technologies used today. Skinner's behaviorism, often referred to as radical behaviorism, went beyond simple stimulus-response models. He posited that internal states, such as thoughts and emotions, were themselves behaviors subject to the same principles as observable actions. By treating these inner experiences as behaviors rather than causes of behavior, he he maintained consistency with his empirical approach. This standpoint challenged prevailing assumptions and broadened the scope of behaviorist analysis. Despite its scientific foundation, Skinner's work was not without critics. Cognitive psychologists argued that behaviorism ignored the mental processes underlying learning, such as memory, problem-solving, and reasoning. As the cognitive revolution gained momentum in the latter half of the 20th century, many saw behaviorism as too narrow in its focus. Nevertheless, even as cognitive theories gained prominence, Skinner's influence persisted, particularly in applied settings such as behavior therapy, education, and organizational management. Applied behavior analysis, ABA, a direct descendant of Skinnerian principles, has become an essential methodology in various domains, especially in interventions for individuals with developmental disorders like autism. By identifying specific behaviors, analyzing their antecedents and consequences, and systematically applying reinforcement strategies, ABA has achieved significant success in improving communication, social skills, and independence in individuals with special needs. In addition to his empirical work, Skinner was a prolific writer and public intellectual. His books, including Science and Human Behavior, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, and About Behaviorism, laid out his theories in accessible language and addressed broader philosophical implications. He questioned traditional notions of free will and moral responsibility, arguing instead that behavior is determined by environmental contingencies. This deterministic view sparked considerable philosophical debate and drew criticism from those who saw it as reductive or mechanistic. Still, Skinner maintained that understanding the causes of behavior was essential for creating a humane and effective society. Skinner's legacy is complex and multifaceted. While he was admired for his scientific rigor and practical contributions, he was also criticized for what some perceived as an overly simplistic view of human nature. Yet even among his critics, there was acknowledgement of the power and utility of his methods. His work helped move psychology toward a more empirical and measurable science, paving the way for both advancements and challenges to his theories. The rise of behaviorism, with Skinner at its helm, marked a pivotal shift in psychology's history. It emphasized the importance of the environment in shaping behavior and highlighted the potential for systematic intervention to bring about behavioral change. This approach contrasted sharply with earlier schools of thought that relied heavily on introspection or unobservable constructs. By grounding psychology in observable and quantifiable phenomena, behaviorism established itself as a dominant force for much of the 20th century. In academic circles, Skinner's name became synonymous with a methodical, data-centric approach to psychology. His laboratory at Harvard became a hub of research and innovation, attracting students and collaborators from around the world. He trained a generation of psychologists who carried forward the behaviorist tradition, applying it in diverse fields ranging from marketing to mental health. Though later developments in psychology have expanded the field to include cognitive and humanistic perspectives, the foundational principles introduced by Skinner remain deeply embedded in psychological science. Concepts such as reinforcement, shaping, extinction, and stimulus control continue to inform research, therapy, and education. Even modern neural and computational models of learning echo many of the structures that Skinner meticulously documented through behavioral analysis. Skinner passed away in 1990, but his intellectual legacy endures. His commitment to understanding behavior through science and his vision of a society guided by reason and evidence continue to provoke reflection and dialogue. Whether one agrees with all his conclusions or not, there is little doubt that Skinner reshaped the course of psychology and left an indelible mark on how we understand and influence human behavior. The rise of behaviorism under B.F. Skinner's guidance was more than just a scientific movement. It was a cultural and intellectual revolution. By championing the idea that human behavior could be studied with the same precision as any natural phenomenon, he transformed the discipline of psychology and extended its relevance into everyday life. His work remains a cornerstone in the study of behavior, a testament to the enduring impact of scientific inquiry grounded in observation, experimentation, and a relentless pursuit of understanding. Ivan Pavlov and the Science of Conditioned Reflexes. Ivan Petrovich Pavlov stands as one of the towering figures in the annals of scientific discovery, particularly in the realm of physiology and psychology. Born in 1849 in Ryazan, Russia, Pavlov's journey from a devoutly religious family to the pinnacle of scientific achievement reflects a deep curiosity and an unwavering commitment to understanding the mechanisms that govern living beings. Initially embarking on a path to become a priest, Pavlov's interest in the sciences soon eclipsed his religious training, and he transitioned to studying natural sciences at the University of St. Petersburg. This shift would later pave the way for some of the most groundbreaking research in behavioral science. Pavlov's scientific contributions were not the product of sudden insight, but rather the culmination of meticulous, methodical experimentation conducted over decades. His earliest work focused on the physiology of digestion, a field in which he would earn the Nobel Prize in 1904. Through detailed experiments with dogs, Pavlov demonstrated how various glands in the digestive system respond to stimuli such as food. However, it was during these investigations that Pavlov observed something unexpected. His dogs began to salivate not only when food was presented, but even when they saw the lab assistant who fed them. This seemingly minor observation marked the inception of a concept that would revolutionize the understanding of behavior. Pavlov recognized that this anticipatory salivation was not a product of digestion itself, but a learned association formed through repeated experiences. Intrigued by this phenomenon, he redirected his focus from digestive physiology to what he termed conditioned reflexes. In his classic experiments, he paired a neutral stimulus, a metronome, a bell, or a tuning fork, with the presentation of food. After several pairings, the dogs began to salivate at the sound of the stimulus alone, even when no food was presented. This learned response, which he called a conditioned reflex, contrasted with the innate or unconditioned reflex of salivating in response to food. The implications of this discovery were profound, offering a new lens through which to view learning and behavior. The brilliance of Pavlov's work lay not only in the discovery itself, but in the rigorous scientific methodology he employed. He maintained strict controls in his laboratory and insisted on objective measurements, utilizing a device called a Pavlovian pouch to collect and quantify saliva from the dogs. This precision enabled him to draw reliable conclusions and reproduce results, which lent credence to his theories within the scientific community. Moreover, his experimental design provided a blueprint for future research in psychology and neuroscience, anchoring behavioral studies in physiological processes rather than abstract introspection. Pavlov's work gained international recognition, particularly among psychologists who saw parallels between his findings and human behavior. Though Pavlov himself remained a physiologist and was initially skeptical of psychology as a field, his discoveries laid the groundwork for behaviorism, a movement that would dominate psychological thought in the 20th century. Thinkers like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner drew heavily from Pavlov's findings to develop theories on how environment shapes behavior through conditioning. In this way, Pavlov's insights transcended disciplinary boundaries, influencing education, therapy, animal training, and even marketing strategies. Despite his association with dogs and bells in popular culture, Pavlov's intellectual legacy is far more substantial. He was a pioneering thinker who resisted simplistic explanations and pursued knowledge with relentless diligence. His notion of conditioned reflexes extended beyond basic stimulus-response patterns and ventured into more complex areas, such as generalization, discrimination, and extinction. He demonstrated that responses could be transferred to similar stimuli. A dog conditioned to salivate to a tone of a specific pitch might also respond to tones of a nearby pitch. Conversely, with proper training, the dog could learn to discriminate between similar tones and respond only to the original one. These nuanced observations added layers of complexity to the initial concept of conditioning, making it a robust framework for understanding adaptive behavior. The scientific and cultural context in which Pavlov worked also shaped his research trajectory. Russia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was a land of both intellectual ferment and political upheaval. Pavlov, though not overtly political, navigated the shifting tides with pragmatism and tenacity. He managed to maintain his laboratory through czarist rule, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the early years of the Soviet regime. Despite his occasional criticisms of state policies, he was respected by Soviet authorities for his scientific stature and remained active in research until his death in 1936. His ability to sustain and expand his scientific work amidst such turbulent conditions speaks to his resilience and the high esteem in which he was held. Beyond his experimental achievements, Pavlov was also an influential mentor and teacher. He cultivated a research environment characterized by discipline, collaboration, and rigorous inquiry. Many of his students went on to make significant contributions in various scientific fields, thereby extending his influence across generations. His laboratory became a center for excellence, attracting scholars from around the world. This collaborative spirit ensured that his work did not exist in isolation, but contributed to a broader scientific dialogue that continues to evolve. Pavlov's concept of conditioned reflexes also sparked debates and reinterpretations over time. While his original experiments focused on physiological responses, later psychologists expanded the idea to encompass emotional and cognitive processes. For instance, classical conditioning has been applied to understand phobias, trauma responses, and even addiction. The underlying principle that behaviors can be shaped through association proved to be a powerful tool for both understanding and modifying behavior. Yet, as psychology matured, researchers also recognized the limitations of Pavlovian models, noting that not all learning could be reduced to simple associations. Cognitive and social factors, motivation, and individual differences all play crucial roles in shaping behavior, prompting the development of more comprehensive theories that build on, rather than replace, Pavlov's insights. Interestingly, Pavlov himself was aware of the complexities involved in translating animal experiments to human psychology. He cautioned against simplistic extrapolations and insisted on empirical validation. He also explored the physiological underpinnings of psychiatric disorders, suggesting that abnormalities in conditioned reflexes could be linked to mental illness. This speculative foray into psychopathology was ahead of its time and hinted at the future integration of neuroscience and clinical psychology. The legacy of Ivan Pavlov is thus multifaceted. He was not merely a scientist who trained dogs to salivate. He was a visionary who unveiled fundamental principles of learning and adaptation. His work continues to inspire and inform a wide range of disciplines, from neuroscience and education to artificial intelligence and behavioral economics. The precision and creativity of his experiments serve as a model for scientific inquiry, while the breadth of his influence underscores the enduring relevance of his ideas. Even in the contemporary age, where brain imaging and genetic analysis dominate research, Pavlov's theories retain their significance. The concept of conditioned reflexes remains foundational in understanding how organisms interact with their environment, adapt to change, and develop patterns of response. As science advances, the questions Pavlov posed about how experience shapes behavior, how learning occurs, and how the body and mind are interconnected remain as vital as ever. In remembering Ivan Pavlov, one recalls a scientist of exceptional clarity and perseverance. His legacy is not confined to laboratories or textbooks, but lives on in every exploration of human and animal behavior. Through his tireless pursuit of knowledge, Pavlov opened a window into the dynamic interplay between stimulus and response, between environment and organism, between biology and experience. His life and work remind us that even the most ordinary observations, like a dog drooling at the sound of footsteps, can illuminate the profound mechanisms that govern life itself. Jean Piaget, Understanding the Child's Mind. Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist born in 1896, fundamentally transformed our understanding of childhood cognitive development. Prior to Piaget's research, children were often regarded as miniature adults whose thoughts and reasoning were assumed to be less developed versions of adult cognition. Piaget challenged this notion by emphasizing that children think in fundamentally different ways. His pioneering work offered a structured framework to interpret how children perceive and engage with the world, helping to shape educational practices and psychological theories for generations to come. Piaget's early interest in biology, particularly in mollusks, influenced his methodical and observational approach to psychology. His background in natural sciences provided him with an appreciation for evolution and adaptation, which he later applied to cognitive development. When he began working with standardized intelligence tests in Paris, he noticed that children of the same age often made similar types of errors. This observation sparked a curiosity about the logic behind children's thought processes, motivating him to delve deeper into developmental psychology. Unlike many psychologists of his era, Piaget was less concerned with measuring intelligence through scores and more interested in understanding the process of thought itself. He believed intelligence was not a fixed trait, but rather a dynamic, evolving capability that unfolded through specific stages. Piaget proposed that children pass through a series of cognitive stages, each characterized by distinct patterns of thinking and problem solving. His stage theory of cognitive development included the sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational stages, with each stage marking a qualitative leap in mental abilities. In the sensory motor stage, which spans from birth to approximately 2 years old, infants learn about the world through their senses and physical interactions. During this period, they begin to develop object permanence, the understanding that objects continue to exist even when not in view. This concept may seem simple to adults, but for infants, it marks a profound realization that objects and people have a constant presence in the world. It's the beginning of a child constructing mental representations of their environment. Following this, the pre-operational stage extends from about 2 to 7 years of age. Children in this stage are capable of symbolic thought, meaning they can use words, images, and symbols to represent objects. However, their thinking remains intuitive and egocentric. Piaget described how children at this age struggle to see perspectives outside their own. For instance, in his famous Three Mountains experiment, young children were unable to comprehend that an observer on the opposite side of the model would have a different viewpoint. This stage is also marked by centration, where a child focuses on one aspect of a situation while ignoring others, often leading to errors in judgment. The next stage, the concrete operational period, generally lasts from 7 to 11 years old. During this time, children begin to think logically about concrete events. They acquire the ability to perform mental operations, such as conservation, classification, and seriation, provided the information is tangible and directly experienced. Conservation, for instance, is the understanding that quantity remains the same despite changes in shape or appearance, a concept grasped by children in the pre-operational stage. Logical reasoning begins to emerge, though it is still grounded in the here and now rather than in abstract hypotheticals. The final stage in Piaget's theory is the formal operational stage, which typically begins around age 12 and continues into adulthood. Here, individuals develop the capacity for abstract thought, hypothetical reasoning, and systematic planning. Adolescents in this stage can consider multiple variables, anticipate consequences, and engage in scientific reasoning. They can formulate hypotheses and imagine outcomes not rooted in their immediate experience. This marks the emergence of mature intellectual functioning and the ability to think beyond the physical reality. One of Piaget's most significant contributions was his concept of schemas, mental structures or frameworks that help individuals organize and interpret information. Children build and modify these schemas through processes Piaget called assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation involves integrating new information into existing schemas, while accommodation requires altering one's schema to incorporate new experiences. Through these complementary processes, children actively construct their understanding of the world, continually adjusting their mental models to align with reality. Rather than viewing children as passive recipients of knowledge, Piaget portrayed them as active explorers who learn by interacting with their environment. His theory emphasized discovery-based learning, where children are encouraged to experiment, ask questions, and solve problems on their own. This approach has had lasting implications for education, inspiring methods that prioritize hands-on learning and intellectual curiosity over rote memorization. Piaget's ideas helped shift the educational paradigm from teacher-centered instruction to a more student-centered approach that considers developmental readiness. Though Piaget's stage theory was groundbreaking, it was not without its critics. Some researchers argued that the stages were too rigid and underestimated the abilities of children. Subsequent studies suggested that children might exhibit behaviors from multiple stages simultaneously, depending on the context and familiarity of the task. Others contended that Piaget's research, which was often based on small, homogeneous samples, lacked generalizability across cultures and social settings. Nevertheless, his emphasis on qualitative change in thinking and his insight into the mechanisms of learning remain influential. Importantly, Piaget did not view development as a race toward adult intelligence. Instead, he saw each stage as valuable in its own right, with its own form of logic and coherence. This perspective underscored the idea that children are not less intelligent than adults. They simply think differently. Their errors are not failures, but indicators of how they are constructing meaning and understanding. By decoding these errors, Piaget illuminated the pathways of mental growth. Piaget also explored moral development, identifying how children's understanding of rules and justice evolved over time. He observed that younger children tend to see rules as fixed and unchangeable, imposed by authority figures. As they mature, children begin to recognize that rules are created by people and can be altered through mutual agreement. This transition reflects a shift from heteronymous to autonomous morality, aligning with broader cognitive changes that occur through the stages of development. Another remarkable aspect of Piaget's legacy is his influence on developmental psychology as a whole. His meticulous observations and theoretical insights laid the groundwork for subsequent researchers to explore cognitive, emotional, and social development in greater depth. Figures such as Lev Vygotsky, though offering contrasting views, engaged deeply with Piaget's work, enriching the field with complementary and competing ideas. While Vygotsky emphasized the role of social interaction and cultural tools in cognitive growth, Piaget focused more on individual discovery and internal processes. Together, their contributions have shaped a more nuanced understanding of how children learn and grow. The methods Piaget used, clinical interviews, observational studies, and experiments tailored to children's cognitive abilities, also set a precedent for future research. His approach demonstrated the importance of engaging with children on their own terms and interpreting their behavior within a developmental framework. By doing so, he humanized the scientific study of childhood, emphasizing empathy, curiosity, and respect for the child's perspective. In many ways, Piaget's work reflects a broader intellectual movement of the 20th century that sought to uncover the hidden processes beneath everyday life. Just as Freud explored the unconscious mind, and Einstein redefined the nature of time and space, Piaget delved into the inner workings of the child's mind, revealing a universe of thought that had previously gone unrecognized. His insights remind us that cognitive development is not merely about acquiring knowledge, but about developing the tools to think, question, and understand the world. Even decades after his death in 1980, Piaget's influence endures in classrooms, research institutions, and parenting philosophies. Educators design curricula that align with developmental stages, psychologists draw on his theories to assess learning challenges, and parents are encouraged to nurture exploratory play and critical thinking from an early age. His work continues to resonate because it captures a fundamental truth. Understanding the child's mind is key to understanding humanity itself. Jean Piaget's legacy is not merely one of theories and stages, but of a profound respect for the child as a thinking, feeling, and growing being. He taught the world to see children not as empty vessels to be filled with knowledge, but as active constructors of meaning. This shift in perspective has reshaped not only psychology and education, but also the way society at large regards its youngest members. By illuminating the rich and complex nature of childhood cognition, Piaget helped unlock the potential of generations to come, making his contributions timeless and universally relevant. The philosophical undertone of Piaget's work was grounded in constructivism, the idea that knowledge is actively built by the learner, not passively absorbed. This principle revolutionized the way learning environments were designed. Classrooms began shifting toward interactive spaces filled with materials that encouraged exploration, experimentation, and discovery. In such environments, mistakes were no longer punished as failures, but embraced as critical steps in the learning journey. Piaget's influence prompted a deeper respect for the intellectual capabilities of children, even in their most formative years. What set Piaget apart was his appreciation for the subtle and often overlooked intricacies of a child's mental life. He observed that children do not merely mimic adult logic, but develop their own internal rules based on experience and interaction. For Piaget, these rules had their own internal consistency and logic, worthy of study and respect. He meticulously documented how children arrive at conclusions that may seem illogical to adults, but are entirely reasonable within the framework of the child's current cognitive structure. By interpreting these thought patterns, Piaget offered adults a window into a different, equally valid way of experiencing reality. In terms of research methodology, Piaget was innovative and deeply observational. He engaged children in problem-solving tasks and carefully noted not only their answers, but also their reasoning processes. This emphasis on qualitative analysis allowed him to trace the evolution of thought patterns with remarkable clarity. He was less concerned with the correctness of an answer and more intrigued by how the child arrived at it. This approach provided a dynamic portrait of mental development, portraying it not as a static accumulation of facts, but as a living, evolving process influenced by both internal and external factors. Over time, Piaget's theories found resonance in various interdisciplinary fields. In education, they laid the foundation for developmental psychology to intersect with pedagogy, making child-centered education not just an ideal, but a standard practice in many countries. The emphasis on readiness, the idea that a child must reach a certain level of mental maturity before grasping particular concepts, became a critical criterion in the formulation of learning objectives. Teachers began to assess not just what children knew, but how they thought, thereby tailoring instruction to align with developmental capacity. Furthermore, Piaget's work has influenced parenting philosophies, encouraging caregivers to engage more attentively with the cognitive worlds of their children. Rather than imposing knowledge, parents inspired by Piaget are more likely to support their children's natural curiosity and offer them opportunities to explore, question, and hypothesize. This nurturing of intellectual independence aligns with Piaget's belief in the active, self-directed nature of learning. The home, under this philosophy, becomes a laboratory of discovery where every question, no matter how small, is treated with significance. Interestingly, Piaget also addressed the concept of equilibration, a process by which children strive to maintain a balance between assimilation and accommodation. This concept explains the dynamic tension inherent in learning, the mental discomfort that arises when new experiences challenge existing beliefs. To resolve this tension, the child must either fit the new information into their current framework or adjust their framework entirely. Equilibration serves as a powerful engine of cognitive growth, underscoring Piaget's conviction that learning is not linear, but dialectical, involving continual synthesis of old and new knowledge. Beyond the individual, Piaget's insights have sparked meaningful discussions about societal structures and the role of education in shaping citizenship. He argued that true education does not aim merely to produce efficient workers, but seeks to foster critical thinkers capable of participating in democratic societies. In this sense, cognitive development becomes a civic matter. Schools are not just places of instruction, but arenas for intellectual and moral development, where children learn to think independently, weigh evidence, and engage in dialogue. This broader vision aligns with the belief that nurturing intellectual autonomy in children ultimately contributes to a more reflective, responsible society. Despite his immense influence, Piaget was not dogmatic about his theories. He saw them as evolving frameworks, open to revision and refinement in light of new evidence. This intellectual humility allowed subsequent generations of researchers to build upon his foundations, challenging some elements while reaffirming others. For example, while newer research has questioned the universality and strict sequencing of the stages he proposed, it has generally upheld the idea that children's thinking progresses through identifiable and transformative shifts. Piaget's openness to critique ensured that his work remained dynamic, not doctrinal. As psychology has advanced, newer perspectives have emerged that complement and sometimes contrast with Piaget's ideas. The field of neurodevelopment, for instance, has added a biological dimension to cognitive theories, highlighting how brain maturation interacts with learning experiences. Meanwhile, sociocultural theorists have emphasized the role of social interaction in cognitive growth, bringing renewed attention to the context in which learning occurs. Nonetheless, Piaget's core insight that children actively construct meaning through interaction with their environment continues to serve as a cornerstone of developmental science. Piaget's contributions also invite reflection on how society measures intelligence and success. His work challenges the overemphasis on standardized testing and encourages a broader definition of intelligence, one that includes creativity, problem solving, and adaptability. In recognizing the diverse ways children approach problems, Piaget affirmed that intelligence is multifaceted and deeply personal. This perspective has inspired educators to develop more inclusive and holistic assessment tools that honor different learning styles and cognitive pathways. Additionally, Piaget's emphasis on sequential development offers a framework for identifying atypical cognitive patterns, thereby contributing to early diagnosis and intervention in developmental disorders. By understanding the typical trajectory of cognitive growth, professionals are better equipped to recognize deviations that may require support. This has profound implications for clinical psychology, special education, and child welfare services, where early and accurate understanding can significantly improve life outcomes. In the digital age, Piaget's theories continue to be relevant, especially as new technologies reshape the landscape of learning. Digital tools offer unprecedented opportunities for interactive and adaptive learning, aligning with Piaget's vision of active, exploratory education. Software that adjusts to a learner's level, provides feedback, and encourages hypothesis testing echoes the developmental principles he espoused. However, Piaget's cautionary stance against passive reception of information also serves as a reminder to use technology thoughtfully, ensuring it enhances rather than replaces genuine intellectual engagement. It is also worth noting the cross-cultural dimensions of Piaget's work. While his theories were initially developed within a Western context, they have inspired research in diverse cultural settings. Some studies have revealed variations in the timing and expression of developmental milestones, suggesting that while the stages may be universal in a broad sense, their manifestation is influenced by cultural practices, language, and social expectations. This has led to a richer and more nuanced application of Piagetian principles, affirming that while children share common developmental pathways, they travel them in ways shaped by their unique environments. The profound legacy of Jean Piaget lies not only in the theoretical frameworks he constructed, but also in the enduring shift he prompted in how we view children, as individuals with their own logic, intentions, and capacities. His work represents a pivotal moment in the history of human thought, where the inner world of the child was no longer considered an enigma or a lesser version of adulthood, but was recognized as a legitimate, complex, and worthy subject of study. In granting the child mind its rightful place in science, Piaget expanded the boundaries of psychology and education, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire inquiry, innovation, and compassion. His life's work remains a testament to the value of careful observation, patient inquiry, and deep respect for the subject of study. Jean Piaget did more than describe stages of development. He captured the essence of how human beings come to know, to understand, and to find their place in the world. His theories remain a touchstone for anyone seeking to foster learning that is not merely informed, but transformative. In celebrating the developing mind, Piaget championed a vision of human potential that continues to guide educators, parents, and psychologists around the globe. Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow, a 20th century American psychologist, left a profound mark on the study of human behavior and motivation through his formulation of the hierarchy of needs. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1908 to immigrant parents, Maslow's early life experiences and education helped shape his deep interest in psychology, especially in understanding what drives individuals to achieve their full potential. His academic journey led him through some of the most prestigious institutions in the United States, including the University of Wisconsin and later Columbia University, where he studied under notable figures who influenced his thinking. Over time, Maslow grew disillusioned with the dominant theories of his era, particularly the deterministic focus of behaviorism and the negative outlook on the human psyche, often present in Freudian psychoanalysis. He believed there was more to human nature than conflict and conditioning, and sought a more optimistic and holistic understanding of psychological well being. Maslow's search for a more positive psychology culminated in the development of a motivational theory that has since become a cornerstone of psychological and educational frameworks. His theory proposed that human beings are motivated by a series of needs that exist in a hierarchical order, beginning with the most fundamental physiological requirements and ascending toward more abstract and self-fulfilling goals. This structure, known as the hierarchy of needs, consists of 5 primary levels: physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Each level represents a cluster of needs that must, in most cases, be at least partially satisfied before an individual can move on to the next. While the theory has evolved and attracted both acclaim and criticism, its foundational ideas remain influential across disciplines, including education, business, healthcare, and social work. The hierarchy begins with physiological needs, which are the essential elements required to sustain human life. These include food, water, air, sleep, and shelter. Maslow posited that until these most basic needs are met, a person cannot attend to any higher-level aspirations. A hungry, dehydrated, or sleep-deprived individual is naturally preoccupied with fulfilling these immediate requirements, and other concerns become secondary. The importance of this foundational level reflects Maslow's understanding that survival must precede growth. Once these physiological demands are adequately addressed, individuals begin to seek safety and security. This next level includes protection from harm, stability in employment, health security, and the predictability of one's environment. In modern contexts, this might also encompass financial security, legal protections, and access to healthcare. As safety becomes less of a daily concern, human motivation shifts towards social needs. The third tier in Maslow's hierarchy encompasses love and belonging, which involve relationships, emotional attachments, and the sense of being part of a group. Humans are inherently social creatures, and Maslow recognized the deep importance of friendships, family connections, and intimate relationships. The need for acceptance, affection, and community reflects a psychological craving that can significantly impact an individual's mental health and overall well-being. Isolation, loneliness, and rejection at this level can hinder personal development and lead to emotional distress. For Maslow, these social connections were not merely luxuries. They were essential components of a fulfilled human life. Above the need for belonging lies the need for esteem, which includes the desire for self-respect as well as the respect of others. This level encompasses personal achievements, confidence, status, recognition, and feelings of competence. Maslow understood that people strive to be seen as capable and valuable, not only to others, but also to themselves. He distinguished between 2 forms of esteem: a lower form based on the recognition and approval of others, and a higher form rooted in self-mastery, autonomy, and personal dignity. When this need is satisfied, individuals feel a sense of worth and accomplishment, which empowers them to pursue even greater aspirations. Conversely, if these needs are unmet, individuals may struggle with feelings of inferiority, helplessness, or failure. At the top of Maslow's hierarchy lies self-actualization, a concept that he viewed as the pinnacle of human motivation. Self-actualization represents the fulfillment of one's potential, the pursuit of personal growth, and the realization of innate talents and capabilities. It is not a fixed state, but a continual process of becoming more of what one is capable of being. People who reach this level are often creative, spontaneous, and deeply concerned with truth, beauty, and meaning. Maslow emphasized that self-actualized individuals were not necessarily perfect or without flaws, but they were characterized by authenticity, a clear sense of purpose, and a deep connection to their values. Importantly, this stage is not reached by all, and it often requires a stable foundation of the previous needs to be fully engaged. Maslow's theory was revolutionary, not only because it introduced a structured model of motivation, but also because it challenged prevailing psychological theories that largely ignored positive human experiences. He introduced a humanistic approach to psychology that emphasized the innate goodness of people and their capacity for growth. Uh, Maslow's work provided a refreshing counterpoint to the more mechanistic and pathology-focused models of his contemporaries. His belief that people are driven not just by deficits, but by a desire to grow and thrive, helped lay the groundwork for what would later become positive psychology. Through his writings and lectures, Maslow inspired a generation of thinkers to consider what makes life worth living, rather than simply what goes wrong in the human mind. Over time, Maslow's original five-stage model was expanded upon by other psychologists, and even he himself considered modifications. In his later years, he explored the idea of self-transcendence, which involved a desire to connect to something greater than oneself, such as altruism, spirituality, or cosmic consciousness. This suggested that even self-actualization might not be the final stage of human motivation. Though this sixth level was never formally integrated into the original hierarchy, it sparked considerable interest among scholars seeking to understand the full spectrum of human experience. The inclusion of this potential stage indicated Maslow's openness to evolving his theories and his recognition of the complexity of human needs. Despite its enduring popularity, Maslow's hierarchy of needs has not been without criticism. Some have argued that human motivation is not always linear, and that people do not necessarily progress through the hierarchy in a fixed order. For instance, individuals in extreme poverty may demonstrate remarkable self-actualization through creativity or community service, despite lacking basic security or comfort. Others have pointed out cultural differences in how needs are prioritized. In collectivist societies, for example, community and social harmony may be valued more than personal achievement, challenging the Western-centric assumptions embedded in Maslow's framework. Nonetheless, the general structure of the hierarchy remains a valuable heuristic tool for understanding how different needs can influence behavior. Maslow's ideas have had wide-ranging applications in fields far beyond psychology. In education, teachers have used the hierarchy to understand student motivation, recognizing that learners who are hungry, scared, or socially excluded are less likely to succeed academically. In business, managers have applied Maslow's model to employee engagement, designing workplace environments that address not only financial compensation, but also opportunities for growth, recognition, and a sense of belonging. In healthcare, practitioners have used the hierarchy to guide patient care, ensuring that basic physical and emotional needs are addressed as a foundation for healing and recovery. The adaptability of the theory across so many disciplines speaks to its conceptual richness and practical utility. As a historical figure, Maslow occupies a unique place in the evolution of psychological thought. He was a pioneer in elevating the study of positive human potential to a central position in academic psychology. While others focused on what made people sick, he focused on what made them flourish. His emphasis on wholeness, integration, and self-discovery continues to resonate in both academic and popular contexts. Maslow's work not only challenged existing paradigms, but also offered a hopeful vision of human nature, one grounded in the belief that individuals possess an inherent drive to grow, connect, and realize their highest possibilities. Maslow passed away in 1970, but his legacy lives on in the countless students, professionals, and thinkers who have been inspired by his vision. His hierarchy of needs remains one of the most widely taught and referenced concepts in psychology, not because it provides definitive answers, but because it opens a window into the richness of the human experience. At its core, Maslow's work reminds us that while survival may be the starting point, the journey of life is ultimately about striving toward purpose, fulfillment, and the actualization of our deeper selves. Through his thoughtful synthesis of human needs, he gave the world not only a theory, but a language for understanding the path towards psychological and emotional well-being. Erik Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development stands as a significant contribution to the field of psychology and human development, offering a comprehensive framework that explains how individuals evolve psychologically and socially across the entire lifespan. Born in 1902, Erikson was influenced by the works of Sigmund Freud, but extended the psychoanalytic tradition by incorporating social and cultural factors into his theory. His model is built upon the idea that at different stages of life, individuals face specific psychosocial conflicts that must be resolved in order to develop a healthy personality and a strong sense of self. These challenges are not simply obstacles, but opportunities for growth and transformation. Through each stage, the individual's identity is molded by the dynamic interaction of internal needs and external social demands. The progression through Erikson's 8 stages is sequential and cumulative, meaning that unresolved challenges in earlier stages can hinder effective development in later ones. However, Erikson emphasized that these stages are not rigidly fixed and can be revisited or addressed later in life. What makes his theory particularly relevant to both historical and contemporary studies of human behavior is its focus on lifelong development. While earlier theories of personality often centered on early childhood, Erikson recognized that development continues throughout the entire lifespan, making his model more holistic and adaptable to diverse life experiences. This perspective aligns well with historical narratives where individuals have often reinvented themselves at various points in life in response to social, political, or cultural shifts. Each stage in Erikson's theory presents a psychosocial conflict that acts as a turning point in development. These conflicts involve 2 opposing emotional forces, such as trust versus mistrust or integrity versus despair, which are shaped by one's experiences and interactions with others. Successfully resolving the conflict results in the acquisition of a core virtue or strength that contributes to overall well-being. For instance, resolving the conflict of autonomy versus shame and doubt leads to the development of willpower and self-confidence. These virtues accumulate over time, reinforcing an individual's capacity to handle future challenges with resilience and adaptability. In essence, Erikson's theory portrays human development as an ongoing negotiation between self and society, where identity is continuously being formed and reformed. In the context of historical development, Erikson's theory offers a lens through which we can analyze the lives of prominent figures and the collective psychological climate of societies at different points in time. For instance, during periods of social upheaval such as wars, revolutions, or cultural renaissance, entire generations may grapple with issues related to identity, purpose, and legacy. Understanding these psychosocial stages allows historians and psychologists alike to interpret how external events influence internal development and vice versa. It also emphasizes that personal identity is never formed in isolation, but is deeply embedded in historical and cultural contexts. Erikson began his model with infancy, a stage where the primary challenge is the establishment of trust. This foundational trust is built through consistent and nurturing care. The resolution of this stage sets the tone for all subsequent development. Moving into early childhood, the emphasis shifts to autonomy as children begin to assert their independence. The confidence gained in this period becomes crucial for initiating actions and making decisions later in life. As children grow into the preschool years, they face the challenge of initiative versus guilt, where they must learn to balance their emerging sense of ambition with the social rules and norms they are learning to navigate. Successfully resolving this stage results in a sense of purpose, another cornerstone of healthy psychological development. As individuals enter the school years, the focus of development becomes industry versus inferiority. This stage highlights the importance of mastering skills, gaining recognition, and feeling competent. A child who emerges from this stage with a sense of achievement is more likely to face adolescence with a solid foundation of self-worth. Adolescence itself is a pivotal stage in Erikson's model, as it centers on identity versus role confusion. This is the time when individuals explore various roles, beliefs, and values in an effort to forge a cohesive sense of self. Identity formation is influenced by family, peers, education, and broader societal expectations. When this stage is navigated successfully, it leads to the development of fidelity, or a stable and authentic commitment to personal values and relationships. The next stages in Erikson's theory focus on early and middle adulthood. In early adulthood, the psychosocial task is to establish intimacy versus isolation. The ability to form deep and meaningful relationships is dependent on the strength of identity developed in adolescence. Failure to develop intimacy can result in feelings of loneliness and emotional isolation. As individuals move into middle adulthood, they confront the challenge of generativity versus stagnation. This stage is about contributing to society through work, community involvement, and raising the next generation. A sense of productivity and care is developed when individuals feel that they are making a meaningful impact. On the other hand, stagnation may result in a sense of disconnection or unfulfillment. Finally, in late adulthood, individuals face the psychosocial conflict of integrity versus despair. This stage involves reflecting on one's life and coming to terms with successes, failures, and the inevitable reality of mortality. A person who looks back with a sense of satisfaction and coherence achieves a state of integrity, embracing the life they have lived. This brings about wisdom, the final virtue in Erikson's model. Conversely, despair may arise in those who feel regret, missed opportunities, or unresolved conflicts from earlier stages. The resolution of this final stage is crucial for achieving a sense of peace in the later years of life and preparing for the end of life with dignity. Erikson's stages resonate with many universal themes in human experience: trust, identity, love, purpose, and reflection. These are not only psychological constructs, but also deeply embedded in historical, literary, and cultural narratives. In literature, for example, countless characters journey through Eriksonian stages, confronting similar internal dilemmas and emerging with new insights or succumbing to unresolved conflicts. In history, entire movements or eras can be analyzed through the lens of psychosocial development. The Enlightenment, for instance, may be viewed as a collective assertion of identity and autonomy by intellectuals who challenged traditional authorities. Similarly, post-war periods often reflect societal efforts toward generativity, rebuilding, and contributing to future generations. Critics of Erikson's theory have pointed out that it tends to reflect a Western perspective on development, emphasizing individual achievement and linear progression. However, its flexibility and broad applicability have allowed it to be adapted across cultures and disciplines. While the specific expressions of each psychosocial conflict may vary depending on cultural norms and values, the underlying human experiences remain consistent. Researchers and educators continue to use Erikson's theory in fields ranging from psychology and education to nursing and social work, demonstrating its enduring relevance. Erikson himself lived a life that reflected the principles he espoused. He was a teacher, a psychoanalyst, and a thinker who constantly re-examined his own identity and role in the world. His work with children, veterans, and various cultural groups informed his belief in the universality of psychosocial challenges. By emphasizing both the individual and societal aspects of development, he bridged the gap between the inner world of personal experience and the outer world of social expectations. His concept of the epigenetic principle, that development unfolds in a predetermined sequence but is influenced by environmental factors, provides a nuanced view that honors both nature and nurture. In today's world, where rapid technological, social, and economic changes continually reshape how people view themselves and others, Erikson's theory offers a stabilizing framework. It reminds us that despite the complexity and unpredictability of life, human development follows a meaningful and potentially healing trajectory. Understanding these stages helps individuals become more compassionate toward themselves and others, recognizing that everyone is navigating their own unique psychosocial journey. It also empowers communities and institutions to create environments that support healthy development at every stage of life, from infancy through old age. In conclusion, Erik Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development provide a profound and insightful roadmap for understanding the human experience. Through a series of age-specific conflicts, individuals are given the opportunity to grow, adapt, and develop a coherent sense of self. Each stage builds upon the last, illustrating the interconnectedness of our psychological and social lives. While grounded in psychological theory, Erikson's model transcends disciplines and continues to influence how we understand personal growth, societal change, and the shared journey of life itself. As a historical narrative, it reminds us that development is both personal and collective, shaped by time, culture, and the enduring quest for meaning. Albert Bandura and social learning theory. Albert Bandura, a pioneering figure in psychology, introduced a theory that has profoundly influenced our understanding of human behavior: social learning theory. This theory, developed in the mid 20th century, emerged as a response to the limitations of traditional behaviorist models, which emphasized stimulus response mechanisms, largely ignoring the role of internal cognitive processes. Bandura, through his groundbreaking work, emphasized that learning is not solely a result of direct reinforcement or punishment, but is also significantly shaped by observing others. His theory integrated cognitive and behavioral frameworks, offering a more comprehensive explanation of how individuals acquire new behaviors and skills. Born in 1925 in Mundare, Alberta, Canada, Bandura pursued a career in psychology that led him to challenge dominant paradigms. At a time when behaviorism, particularly the ideas advanced by B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson, reigned supreme, Bandura introduced the notion that observational learning, or modeling, played a crucial role in shaping human behavior. One of the most iconic demonstrations of this concept was his Bobo doll experiment conducted in 1961. In this study, children watched a model behaving aggressively toward a Bobo doll, a large inflatable toy. The results were revealing. The children who observed the aggressive behavior were more likely to imitate it, even in the absence of any direct reinforcement. This experiment provided compelling empirical support for the idea that people, especially children, learn behaviors simply by watching others. Bandura's social learning theory centers on the idea that behavior is learned through the environment via the process of observational learning. Key components of this theory include attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. For observational learning to occur, the individual must first pay attention to the behavior being modeled. This is influenced by factors such as the model's attractiveness, competence, and similarity to the observer. Once attention is secured, the observer must retain the information. This involves memory processes that allow the individual to later recall and reproduce the behavior. Reproduction refers to the physical and cognitive ability of the observer to replicate the behavior, and motivation involves the reasons for imitating the behavior, which could include expected rewards or punishments. One of the most significant contributions of Bandura's theory is the concept of reciprocal determinism. According to this idea, behavior, cognitive and personal factors, and environmental influences all interact and influence each other bidirectionally. This marked a departure from the one-way causality proposed by earlier behaviorist models. Bandura posited that not only does the environment influence behavior, but individuals also have the power to shape their environment and exert agency in their own development. This concept laid the groundwork for what he later described as human agency, the capacity of individuals to influence their own functioning and life circumstances. Social learning theory has had far-reaching implications across various domains, including education, therapy, media, and social policy. In education, for instance, the role of teachers as models became increasingly emphasized. Educators are not merely conveyors of knowledge, but also serve as behavioral role models. Classroom environments were reconceptualized to foster positive modeling, peer collaboration, and self-regulated learning. Bandura's emphasis on self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations, has been particularly influential in educational psychology. Self-efficacy affects not only the choices people make, but also the effort they put forth and their resilience in the face of challenges. In the realm of psychotherapy and counseling, Bandura's insights have been instrumental in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Techniques that involve modeling appropriate behaviors, observational learning, and self-efficacy training stem directly from Bandura's theoretical framework. Therapists often model behaviors for clients to imitate, whether it's assertive communication, emotional regulation, or problem-solving strategies. Through vicarious reinforcement, clients witness the benefits of these behaviors and are more likely to adopt them. Furthermore, the concept of self-regulation, the ability to control one's behavior through internal processes such as self-monitoring, goal setting, and self-reward, has become a cornerstone in therapeutic practices. Media and its influence on behavior also came under scrutiny through the lens of social learning theory. Bandura was among the first psychologists to empirically demonstrate how media representations could influence real-life behavior. His research prompted ongoing debates and studies into the effects of violent content in television and video games on youth behavior. The recognition that individuals could learn from symbolic models, figures portrayed in books, films, and digital media, expanded the scope of observational learning. Consequently, policymakers and media producers have been urged to consider the potential impact of the content they create and disseminate. Social learning theory also intersects with issues of gender, race, and cultural representation. The theory posits that people are more likely to model behaviors exhibited by individuals who they perceive as similar to themselves. This has implications for how role models are presented in public domains, including the media, politics, and education. The underrepresentation of certain groups can limit the scope of aspirational modeling for individuals within those communities. Bandura's framework thereby contributes to discussions on the importance of inclusive representation and the power of diverse role models in shaping societal values and individual aspirations. In his later work, Bandura expanded social learning theory into what he called social cognitive theory, further emphasizing the importance of cognitive processes in behavior. He introduced the idea that people are proactive and self-reflective, rather than just reactive organisms shaped by their environment. This shift underscored the idea that individuals could engage in forethought, plan courses of action, and regulate their behavior based on internal standards. Human functioning was no longer viewed solely as a response to environmental stimuli, but as an interaction of personal, behavioral, and environmental factors. Bandura's legacy in psychology is monumental, not only because he offered an alternative to deterministic models, but because he provided a practical and applicable framework that resonates across disciplines. His work supports the notion that behavior is learned in social contexts and that individuals are active participants in their own development. This has empowered educators, therapists, policymakers, and parents to foster environments that encourage positive modeling and the development of self-efficacy. The relevance of social learning theory continues to grow, especially in an era dominated by digital and social media. The principles Bandura established decades ago help us understand how influencers shape public behavior, how trends emerge, and why certain ideas go viral. Young people today are constantly exposed to role models across global platforms, and their behaviors, attitudes, and values are increasingly shaped through this virtual observational learning. The ease with which individuals can now access and imitate a vast array of behaviors underscores the ongoing importance of media literacy and critical engagement with content. Bandura also emphasized moral disengagement, a process by which individuals justify unethical behavior through cognitive restructuring. This concept has been instrumental in explaining how people can commit harmful acts while distancing themselves from the consequences. It has been applied in fields ranging from criminology to organizational ethics, offering insights into how individuals and groups rationalize behavior that conflicts with moral standards. Understanding this mechanism has been critical in developing interventions aimed at fostering ethical decision-making and accountability. In educational settings, Bandura's work has inspired pedagogical methods that go beyond rote memorization to include interactive, collaborative, and experiential learning. Techniques such as peer tutoring, cooperative learning, and mentoring programs all draw upon the principles of modeling and vicarious learning. These methods not only promote academic success, but also cultivate social and emotional skills essential for holistic development. Moreover, the influence of Bandura's ideas can be seen in leadership training and organizational behavior. Effective leaders often serve as role models, setting the tone for organizational culture and employee conduct. Training programs that incorporate modeling, feedback, and self-efficacy enhancement are grounded in the principles of social learning theory. Bandura's insights have thus shaped not only individual behavior, but also group dynamics and institutional practices. Throughout his life, Albert Bandura remained committed to the belief that psychology should be both a science and a tool for improving the human condition. His contributions went beyond theoretical insights. They provided practical strategies for education, health promotion, conflict resolution, and community development. He advocated for the use of psychological knowledge to empower individuals, especially those in marginalized or disadvantaged positions, by helping them develop a sense of agency and control over their lives. Bandura passed away in 2021, but his influence endures in contemporary psychology and beyond. His work laid the foundation for a more humane and nuanced understanding of learning and behavior, one that acknowledges the complexity of human interactions and the central role of cognition in shaping experience. Social learning theory remains a cornerstone of psychological education and practice, continually adapted and expanded to address the evolving challenges of human development in a rapidly changing world. Through his research and teachings, Bandura reminded us that people are not merely products of their environments. They are capable of learning, adapting, and transforming both themselves and the world around them. John B. Watson, The Birth of Modern Behaviorism. John B. Watson remains one of the most pivotal figures in the history of psychology, primarily due to his foundational role in the development of behaviorism. Born in 1878 in Travelers Rest, South Carolina, Watson's early life was marked by modest circumstances and a challenging family dynamic. Despite these hurdles, he pursued higher education with determination and eventually earned his Ph.D. and in psychology from the University of Chicago in 1903. At a time when psychology was heavily influenced by introspection and the study of consciousness, Watson's revolutionary ideas would redirect the entire course of the discipline. He vehemently opposed the subjective methods that dominated psychology in the early 20th century and proposed a new approach based entirely on observable behavior. Watson's dissatisfaction with introspection stemmed from its reliance on individual self-report, which he believed lacked scientific rigor. He argued that for psychology to be considered a true science, it needed to abandon the analysis of internal mental states and instead focus on measurable behaviors. This perspective found fertile ground in the scientific community, which was increasingly leaning towards empirical experimental methodologies. In 1913, Watson publicly articulated his vision in the seminal lecture and subsequent article titled Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, often referred to as the Behaviorist Manifesto. In this publication, he boldly declared that psychology should only concern itself with behavior that can be observed and quantified. This marked the formal beginning of behaviorism as a school of thought. Watson's approach was radical in that it proposed to eliminate consciousness from psychological research altogether. He posited that all human behavior could be understood through the study of stimulus-response relationships. According to him, individuals are born as blank slates, or tabula rasa, and all behaviors are learned through interactions with the environment. This notion challenged the prevailing views of the time, particularly those rooted in psychoanalysis and structuralism, which emphasized internal drives, the unconscious mind, and introspective analysis. By advocating a purely objective methodology, Watson sought to elevate psychology to the level of the natural sciences, such as chemistry and physics, where theories could be tested and verified through observation and experimentation. One of the most famous and controversial demonstrations of Watson's behaviorist principles was the Little Albert experiment, conducted in 1920 with his graduate student Rosalie Rayner. In this study, they attempted to condition a fear response in an infant by pairing a loud noise with the presentation of a white rat. Over time, the child began to exhibit fear when presented with the rat alone, illustrating the concept of classical conditioning in humans. While the ethics of this experiment have since been widely criticized, at the time it was viewed as groundbreaking evidence supporting Watson's claims. It underscored his belief that emotional responses could be conditioned and that fears and other behaviors were not inherited, but learned. Watson's ideas extended beyond the academic world and into broader society as he became a prominent public intellectual. After leaving academia, partly due to scandal surrounding his personal life, he worked in advertising, where he applied behaviorist principles to influence consumer behavior. His success in this domain further reinforced the applicability of his theories, demonstrating that behavior could not only be studied but also shaped in predictable ways. He contributed significantly to marketing strategies by using repetition, emotional appeals, and conditioning techniques to sway consumer preferences. This marked a significant intersection of psychology with commerce and laid the groundwork for future developments in consumer behavior and advertising psychology. In the realm of child development, Watson had strong opinions about parenting and education. He advocated for a systematic approach to child rearing that avoided overindulgence and emphasized consistency and discipline. In his book, Psychological Care of Infant and Child, published in 1928, he advised parents to treat their children with a level of detachment to foster independence and emotional resilience. While his strict recommendations were later seen as overly rigid and lacking empathy, they were rooted in his belief that the environment was the primary shaper of human behavior. His emphasis on environmental influence and learned behavior influenced later educational practices and theories about developmental psychology. Watson's behaviorism inspired a wave of subsequent psychologists who expanded on his ideas and introduced refinements. Figures such as B.F. Skinner, who developed operant conditioning, extended the behaviorist framework to include reinforcement and punishment as tools for shaping behavior. While Watson focused primarily on stimulus-response associations, Skinner's work allowed for a more nuanced understanding of behavioral modification. Nonetheless, Watson's initial push to establish behaviorism as a dominant force in psychology laid the essential groundwork for these later advancements. His insistence on observable data and empirical validation continues to influence psychological research and practice to this day. Despite its contributions, behaviorism also faced significant criticism and eventually declined in dominance by the mid-20th century. Critics argued that it failed to account for internal mental processes such as thoughts, emotions, and motivations. The cognitive revolution of the 1950s and 1960s brought a renewed interest in these mental functions, challenging the limitations of the behaviorist model. However, even as cognitive psychology rose in prominence, many of Watson's principles remained embedded in scientific methodology and behavioral therapies. Techniques derived from behaviorist theory, such as systematic desensitization and behavior modification programs, have had lasting applications in clinical settings, education, and organizational behavior. Watson's legacy is complex. While his methods and conclusions were sometimes overly deterministic, his influence on psychology's development as a science is undeniable. He shifted the focus of psychological research toward more objective measures, championed the use of experimental procedures, and emphasized the importance of the environment in shaping behavior. His approach democratized the study of psychology, making it more accessible and applicable to real-world problems. Although his reputation suffered due to personal controversies and the ethical concerns of some of his experiments, his intellectual contributions continued to resonate within the field. Watson emerged at a time when psychology was still searching for its identity. The discipline had recently broken away from philosophy and was attempting to establish itself with scientific credibility. Watson's insistence on objectivity and empirical data provided a blueprint for future psychological research. His behaviorism brought clarity and direction at a critical juncture and offered an alternative to the abstract and speculative nature of early psychological theories. Even though the strict tenets of behaviorism have softened over time, the movement's emphasis on observable outcomes and replicable experiments remains a cornerstone of psychological research. Watson also played a pivotal role in making psychology more applicable to everyday life. By addressing practical concerns like child rearing and advertising, he helped bridge the gap between academic theory and practical application. His work suggested that human behavior could be understood, predicted, and even controlled through systematic observation and conditioning. This premise laid the foundation for applied psychology, which now includes fields such as behavioral therapy, educational psychology, and organizational behavior. His work gave rise to a generation of psychologists who focused on solving real-world problems through behavioral principles. The transition from introspective psychology to behaviorism marked a paradigm shift that would influence not only the academic community but also popular perceptions of human behavior. Watson's insistence that psychology must deal exclusively with observable facts was instrumental in moving the field toward greater scientific rigor. While he did not claim to have all the answers, his methods allowed for the development of reliable, testable hypotheses about human behavior. This scientific orientation transformed the practice of psychology and aligned it more closely with other empirical disciplines. In the decades following Watson's foundational work, behaviorism underwent various modifications and faced new challenges. Yet, its fundamental assumptions continued to inform a wide array of psychological theories and therapeutic approaches. The idea that behavior can be shaped by the environment, that learning plays a critical role in development, and that psychology should be grounded in observable phenomena remain influential. Even with the rise of new paradigms like cognitive neuroscience and humanistic psychology, the foundational principles established by Watson endure as part of the bedrock of psychological science. John B. Watson's career may have ended in controversy, but his intellectual legacy is one of transformation and progress. His ideas forced the field of psychology to re-examine its foundations, to adopt more scientific standards, and to explore new avenues of research. While modern psychology now embraces a more integrative approach that includes cognitive, emotional, and social dimensions, the behavioral framework Watson established continues to be a vital component of the discipline. His influence is felt not only in academic circles, but also in everyday practices that rely on behavioral principles, from classroom management to corporate training to clinical therapy. In summary, John B. Watson stands as a seminal figure in the history of psychology, credited with birthing modern behaviorism and steering the discipline toward a more empirical and objective path. His belief in the power of the environment to shape behavior, his rejection of introspection, and his emphasis on observable data revolutionized the study of the human mind. Though behaviorism as he envisioned it has evolved, its core tenets remain deeply embedded in contemporary psychological thought and practice. Watson's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of bold ideas to reshape an entire field and influence generations to come. Watson's contributions to psychology did not emerge in isolation. They were part of a broader intellectual movement that sought to reformulate human sciences along more empirical lines. His rejection of mentalism echoed a larger scientific zeitgeist that favored quantifiable data over philosophical speculation. In aligning psychology with the methods of the natural sciences, Watson was reflecting and amplifying a shift that was already reshaping other disciplines. His vision of a psychology rooted in experimentation and observation brought it into alignment with broader societal trends, particularly in an age increasingly defined by industrialization, mechanization, and efficiency. This broader context helped behaviorism to gain traction, as its promise of predictability and control resonated with a society that valued systematic outcomes and technological progress. Watson also contributed significantly to the shaping of psychological research design. His emphasis on variables that could be manipulated and measured laid the groundwork for experimental psychology as we know it. His methods often involved strict control of environmental factors to isolate specific cause and effect relationships in behavior. This emphasis on laboratory precision became a defining feature of psychological inquiry in subsequent decades. Moreover, Watson's approach facilitated the development of standardized protocols, enabling researchers across institutions to replicate experiments and build upon each other's work. This collaborative advancement in research methodology owes much to Watson's insistence on objectivity and clarity. Another important dimension of Watson's legacy lies in his influence on educational systems. His theories found expression in pedagogical models that emphasized reinforcement, repetition, and conditioning as means of effective teaching. Although later educational psychologists would integrate cognitive theories into their frameworks, behaviorist approaches remained dominant for much of the early 20th century. Classroom strategies such as rote memorization, drill exercises, and structured feedback mechanisms trace their roots back to behaviorist principles. These methods were seen as reliable tools for shaping student behavior and ensuring consistent academic outcomes, especially in large educational systems seeking efficiency and standardization. In popular culture and media, Watson's ideas also left a noticeable imprint. The notion that human behavior could be engineered appealed to writers, filmmakers, and journalists who explored themes of social conditioning, free will, and the malleability of identity. This cultural fascination often reflected both admiration and unease with the implications of behaviorist thinking. On the one hand, the potential to solve problems like addiction, aggression, or educational deficits was compelling. On the other, the idea that individuals could be manipulated or molded raised ethical concerns about autonomy and agency. This dual reception contributed to an enduring cultural dialogue about the role of environment versus innate traits in human development, a dialogue that persists to this day. Watson's impact extended internationally as behaviorism gained recognition beyond the United States. In countries undergoing modernization, his theories were seen as tools for social reform and institutional planning. Educational programs, prison systems, and workforce training initiatives adopt behaviorist frameworks to instill discipline and productivity. Watson's clear, systematic principles were particularly attractive in contexts seeking to rapidly implement scalable behavioral changes. Although localized adaptations were made to suit cultural norms and values, the core idea of behavior as a product of environmental conditioning proved universally adaptable. As such, Watson's influence became part of a global shift in how behavior was understood, studied, and managed. In the corporate world, Watson's tenure in advertising became a case study in applied psychology. At the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency, he utilized psychological insights to create persuasive campaigns based on emotional association and repetition. He understood that consumers could be conditioned to associate products with desired feelings, whether it be happiness, security, or social status. This method marked a turning point in advertising strategies as it moved beyond presenting factual information to constructing emotional narratives that shaped consumer behavior. These techniques proved so effective that they remain foundational in modern marketing, with contemporary strategies continuing to echo Watson's core principles of stimulus response conditioning. Watson's public persona also played a role in disseminating his ideas. He was a charismatic speaker and prolific writer who brought psychological concepts to a broader audience through articles, books, and public lectures. His ability to communicate complex ideas in accessible language helped demystify psychology and make it relevant to everyday life. This engagement with the public elevated the profile of psychology as a discipline and encouraged broader acceptance of its principles in domains like parenting, education, and self-improvement. His emphasis on the practical value of psychological knowledge foreshadowed the emergence of applied psychology as a respected and vital field. Critically, Watson also helped to redefine the concept of personality. In contrast to earlier theories that emphasized fixed traits or inherent temperaments, Watson proposed that personality is a product of learned behaviors and environmental influences. He suggested that, through systematic training, individuals could develop virtually any set of behaviors. This notion challenged deterministic views of personality rooted in biology or fate and opened new possibilities for personal development and behavioral change. Although subsequent research has revealed a more complex interaction between genetic and environmental factors, Watson's emphasis on the plasticity of human behavior remains a foundational idea in developmental and behavioral psychology. The long-term significance of Watson's behaviorism is also evident in the realm of therapeutic practice. Behavioral therapies, which emerged in the mid-20th century, drew directly from his foundational principles. Techniques such as exposure therapy, aversion therapy, and token economies were built on the assumption that maladaptive behaviors could be unlearned and replaced with more adaptive ones through conditioning. These approaches have proven effective in treating a wide range of psychological disorders, including phobias, substance abuse, and anxiety disorders. Watson's vision of a psychology that not only studied behavior but actively sought to improve human lives found fulfillment in these therapeutic modalities. In examining the criticisms leveled against Watson, it's essential to distinguish between legitimate concerns and misunderstandings of his intent. One recurring critique is that behaviorism, as championed by Watson, dehumanized individuals by reducing them to mechanical responses. While it is true that Watson focused on observable actions and minimized internal experience, his goal was not to negate human complexity, but to create a reliable, scientific foundation for psychological inquiry. He believed that without objectivity and empirical grounding, psychology risked becoming speculative and unscientific. His approach may have been reductionist, but it was also a necessary corrective to the vague and often untestable claims of earlier psychological theories. Another frequent criticism centers on the ethical implications of manipulating behavior. The power to shape behavior through conditioning naturally raises concerns about consent and misuse. However, these concerns are not unique to behaviorism. They are inherent to any system that influences human action, whether through education, law, or social norms. Watson's contributions should be understood in light of their context and intent. His goal was to understand behavior scientifically, not to endorse authoritarian control. Modern ethical standards in psychology, including informed consent and debriefing, have evolved in part as a response to the challenges posed by early experiments like those Watson conducted. These developments reflect the maturing of the field rather than a rejection of his foundational insights. The legacy of Watson's behaviorism is also evident in interdisciplinary research, especially in areas like behavioral economics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. In behavioral economics, for example, principles of reinforcement and habit formation are used to understand consumer choices and financial decision-making. In neuroscience, the study of reward pathways and learning mechanisms draws directly from behaviorist models of conditioning. In AI, algorithms that learn through reinforcement bear a striking resemblance to the stimulus-response frameworks Watson promoted. This cross-pollination of ideas underscores the enduring relevance of his theories and their capacity to inform diverse domains of inquiry. As we reflect on the enduring influence of John B. Watson, it becomes clear that his contributions extend far beyond the confines of academic psychology. He helped shape how we think about learning, behavior, and human potential. He challenged the field to embrace scientific rigor and empirical validation, paving the way for a more systematic and impactful discipline. His work continues to influence everything from classroom instruction and mental health treatment to marketing and machine learning. Even as psychology has evolved to incorporate cognitive, emotional, and social factors, the foundational importance of observable behavior remains central. Wilhelm Wundt and the First Psychology Lab. Wilhelm Wundt is widely regarded as the founding figure of modern psychology. His groundbreaking work in the late 19th century laid the foundation for psychology as a distinct scientific discipline, separate from philosophy and physiology. Born in 1832 in Neckarau, Germany, Wundt's early education was rooted in the sciences, and he later studied medicine at the University of Heidelberg. During his academic journey, he developed a profound interest in the workings of the human mind. This interest eventually blossomed into a career dedicated to uncovering the structure and processes of consciousness. His efforts culminated in the establishment of the first official psychology laboratory in Leipzig, Germany in 1879, a moment that is often celebrated as the formal birth of experimental psychology. Before Wundt's contributions, questions about the human mind and behavior were primarily addressed through philosophy or general biology. However, Wundt's vision was different. He aimed to study the mind using the empirical methods of science, thereby transforming psychology into a measurable and experimental field. His approach emphasized introspection, a method through which trained individuals would observe and report their conscious experiences in response to stimuli. Although introspection has its critics today, it was at the time a revolutionary method for studying mental processes. Wundt believed that by examining these internal experiences under controlled conditions, researchers could discover the basic elements of consciousness and understand how they combine to form complex mental phenomena. The psychology laboratory he founded at the University of Leipzig became a magnet for students and scholars from around the world. There, Wundt designed carefully structured experiments and sought to identify the laws governing mental processes. The lab was furnished with apparatuses typically found in physics and physiology labs, devices to measure reaction time, attention span, sensory responses, and other cognitive functions. The experimental environment created by Wundt marked a decisive departure from the speculative methods of philosophy and toward a more rigorous, data-driven science of the mind. Wundt's impact was magnified through his prolific writing and teaching. He authored more than 50,000 pages over his lifetime, including influential texts such as Principles of Physiological Psychology, which is considered one of the foundational works of modern psychology. In this work, he articulated the need to study mental life with the same precision and objectivity used in the natural sciences. His vision for psychology was that it should be both a natural science and a cultural science. He distinguished between the two, referring to the experimental study of immediate conscious experience and the more interpretive analysis of higher mental functions like language, myth, and morality, which he believed required different methods of inquiry. His students carried his legacy across continents, bringing the scientific study of psychology to other parts of Europe, North America, and Asia. Many of them went on to become influential psychologists in their own right, establishing laboratories and teaching Wundt's principles. Among his most notable students was G. Stanley Hall, who later founded the American Psychological Association and helped introduce experimental psychology to the United States. In this way, Wundt's influence extended far beyond the walls of his Leipzig laboratory, shaping the development of psychology around the world. What set Wundt apart from his contemporaries was not just his innovative use of experimental methods, but also his commitment to psychology as a separate and legitimate field of study. He meticulously outlined the objectives, methods, and boundaries of psychology, offering a clear blueprint for future research. He argued that psychology should be concerned with the study of immediate experience rather than abstract speculation. This marked a shift in intellectual culture, where empirical observation gained primacy over introspective philosophy. Despite the eventual decline of introspection as a primary method in psychology, Wundt's broader contributions remained vital. His work encouraged the adoption of experimental techniques and inspired the creation of structured psychological research. Later movements in psychology, such as behaviorism and cognitive psychology, emerged partly in response to the limitations of introspective methods, yet they also built upon the foundation Wundt had laid. He had demonstrated that psychological processes could be subjected to systematic investigation, paving the way for more sophisticated and diverse approaches. Wundt also emphasized the importance of culture and language in shaping human thought. His 10-volume work, Völkerpsychologie, Cultural Psychology, explored the influence of societal and historical factors on mental life, reflecting his belief that higher mental processes could not be fully understood through laboratory experiments alone. Though this work received less attention than his experimental studies, it revealed the depth of his intellectual range and his recognition of the complexity of human psychology. He saw value in both quantitative and qualitative research, offering a vision of psychology that was rich, layered, and comprehensive. At the heart of Wundt's work was the belief that psychology must rest on scientific principles to be credible and useful. He introduced the idea of measuring mental processes with precision, timing reactions down to fractions of a second. This allowed researchers to formulate hypotheses and test them with observable, replicable results. The rigorous structure of his lab and his insistence on repeatability and objectivity helped establish standards for psychological research that are still followed today. By prioritizing the measurement of mental activity, Wundt set in motion a tradition of empirical inquiry that would evolve over time, but always retain its commitment to systematic observation and analysis. His laboratory became a model for future psychological institutions, setting a precedent for how psychology should be taught and studied. The training of students in controlled experimental methods meant that a new generation of psychologists was equipped with tools and frameworks to expand the field. Wundt's educational philosophy emphasized clarity of thought, careful observation, and ethical responsibility. These principles were embedded in the culture of his laboratory and disseminated through his writings and lectures. Wundt's legacy is further underscored by the way in which he defined the scope of psychological study. He acknowledged the importance of both physiological mechanisms and subjective experience, positioning psychology as a bridge between the natural sciences and the humanities. This interdisciplinary perspective allowed psychology to engage with questions of perception, memory, emotion, and volition in nuanced ways. His insistence on methodological clarity and theoretical coherence helped shape the identity of psychology during its formative years. Throughout his life, Wundt remained dedicated to advancing the scientific study of the mind. He continued to refine his theories, revise his writings, and mentor students well into his later years. His death in 1920 marked the end of an era, but the discipline he had helped create continued to grow and diversify. Today, while modern psychology has branched into numerous subfields, from neuropsychology to social psychology to artificial intelligence, the intellectual lineage can still be traced back to Wundt's original vision of a systematic, empirical study of human thought and behavior. Though new methods and theories have emerged over time, Wundt's role as a pioneer remains undisputed. He not only founded the first psychology lab, but also helped legitimize the discipline at a time when the study of the mind was often viewed with skepticism. His relentless pursuit of scientific rigor and his commitment to intellectual integrity laid a strong foundation upon which future psychological science would be built. Wundt's work reminds us that the quest to understand the human mind is not only a scientific endeavor, but also a deeply human one, requiring patience, curiosity, and a respect for complexity. In sum, Wilhelm Wundt's contributions to psychology were both foundational and transformative. His establishment of the first psychology laboratory was more than just a symbolic act. It was the practical beginning of psychology as a science. His methodological innovations, theoretical insights, and educational legacy have left an indelible mark on the discipline. As the field continues to evolve in response to new discoveries and technologies, Wundt's pioneering spirit serves as a reminder of the importance of vision, discipline, and dedication in the pursuit of knowledge. William James, the father of American psychology. William James, often hailed as the father of American psychology, stands as one of the most influential figures in the history of modern thought. Born in 1842 in New York City, he belonged to a family steeped in intellectual pursuit and spiritual inquiry. His father, Henry James Sr., was a noted theologian, and his brother, Henry James, became a prominent novelist. Growing up in such an environment allowed William James to explore a wide range of disciplines from an early age, ultimately shaping him into a thinker of exceptional depth and originality. His academic journey began with medical studies at Harvard University, but his interests soon expanded into philosophy and psychology, fields in which he would leave a lasting legacy. James's work emerged during a pivotal time in the intellectual evolution of the United States. The late 19th century was an era of transformation, with science and reason increasingly challenging traditional frameworks of understanding. In this context, James's pioneering approach bridged the gap between philosophy and empirical science. He was among the first to introduce psychology as a legitimate scientific discipline in American universities, laying the groundwork for its development through both theoretical exploration and practical application. His seminal text, The Principles of Psychology, published in 1890, remains a foundational work in the field. It offered an in-depth and systematic account of human consciousness, emotion, habit, and will, providing a comprehensive perspective that blended philosophical insight with empirical observation. Unlike many of his contemporaries who focused narrowly on the biological mechanisms of behavior, James approached psychology through a holistic lens. He believed that the human mind could not be fully understood through laboratory experiments alone. Instead, he emphasized the importance of experience, subjectivity, and individual perspective. One of his most influential concepts was the stream of consciousness, a term he coined to describe the continuous flow of thoughts and feelings that make up human awareness. This idea challenged previous notions that treated mental processes as isolated and compartmentalized. By highlighting the fluid and ever-changing nature of consciousness, James opened the door for future explorations into cognition, perception, and personality. In addition to his contributions to psychology, William James was a profound philosopher who helped shape the school of thought known as pragmatism. This philosophy proposed that the truth of an idea should be evaluated based on its practical consequences and usefulness. For James, beliefs were not simply abstract notions to be analyzed in isolation. They were tools that individuals used to navigate the complexities of life. This pragmatic approach offered a flexible, adaptive framework for thinking, particularly suited to the challenges of modernity. His 1907 book, Pragmatism, a new name for some old ways of thinking, brought this philosophy to a wider audience and positioned him as a leading voice in American intellectual life. James's pragmatic outlook also informed his views on religion, which he explored deeply in his 1902 work, The Varieties of Religious Experience. This book, based on a series of lectures he gave at the University of Edinburgh, examined religious belief from a psychological perspective. Rather than debating the truth or falsity of religious doctrines, James sought to understand the personal experiences that underlie faith. He argued that religious experiences are real and meaningful to those who have them, regardless of their metaphysical validity. In doing so, he offered a way to bridge the divide between science and spirituality, advocating for a pluralistic and inclusive view of human belief systems. Throughout his career, James maintained a commitment to intellectual openness and curiosity. He resisted dogma and encouraged a spirit of inquiry that valued diversity of thought. His writings reveal a deep respect for the complexity of the human condition and an insistence that no single perspective can capture the full range of human experience. This humility and openness set him apart from many of his contemporaries and continue to inspire scholars across disciplines. Even as he explored abstract philosophical questions, James remained grounded in the practical realities of life, always seeking to connect theory with lived experience. William James's impact on education was also significant. He was among the first professors to teach psychology in the United States and played a key role in establishing the first psychology laboratory at Harvard. His engaging lectures and clear, accessible writing helped popularize psychological ideas among both students and the general public. He believed that education should not merely impart knowledge, but should also cultivate critical thinking and moral insight. This philosophy of education, emphasizing active engagement and personal growth, aligns closely with his broader intellectual ethos. In the realm of emotion, James proposed a groundbreaking theory, often referred to as the James-Lange theory, which suggested that emotions arise from physiological responses to stimuli. According to this view, we do not cry because we are sad. Rather, we feel sad because we cry. This reversed the traditional understanding of emotion and laid the foundation for future research in both psychology and neuroscience. Although later modified and critiqued, the theory represented a bold and innovative step in understanding the interplay between body and mind. James's influence extended beyond academia. His ideas resonated with a broader audience seeking guidance in an era marked by rapid social and technological change. At a time when traditional sources of meaning were being questioned, his work offered a framework for navigating uncertainty. He encouraged individuals to take responsibility for their beliefs and actions, emphasizing the role of personal agency in shaping one's destiny. This emphasis on choice and responsibility resonated with the American spirit of individualism and contributed to the development of existential and humanistic psychology in the 20th century. In his personal life, James was known for his warm personality, intellectual generosity, and deep empathy. He struggled with periods of depression and self-doubt, experiences that informed his sensitivity to the complexities of the human psyche. Rather than retreating from these challenges, he used them as a source of insight, enriching his understanding of human motivation and resilience. His willingness to confront his own vulnerabilities added depth to his work and made his writings more relatable to readers grappling with similar issues. Despite his accomplishments, James remained acutely aware of the limitations of human knowledge. He often spoke of the pluralistic universe, a concept reflecting his belief in the diversity and multiplicity of truths. For James, reality was not a single, unified system to be neatly categorized, but a complex, evolving interplay of forces and perspectives. This view encouraged tolerance and an appreciation for different viewpoints, qualities that remain crucial in today's increasingly interconnected world. As the first American to gain international recognition in the field of psychology, James helped to establish the United States as a center for psychological research and education. His legacy can be seen in the countless students he inspired, the institutions he helped build, and the enduring relevance of his ideas. His contributions laid the groundwork for future psychological theories and therapeutic practices, including cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, and the study of consciousness. James passed away in 1910, but his influence endures. His works are still studied in philosophy and psychology courses around the world, and his ideas continue to spark debate and reflection. More than a century after his death, his vision of a psychology rooted in human experience, open inquiry, and practical relevance remains as compelling as ever. His unique ability to integrate scientific rigor with philosophical depth has ensured his place as one of the foundational figures in the history of modern thought. In remembering William James, we honor not just a brilliant thinker, but a compassionate human being whose work continues to illuminate the paths of knowledge, belief, and personal growth. His life serves as a testament to the power of curiosity, the value of intellectual courage, and the enduring quest to understand the nature of the human mind. Through his pioneering efforts, psychology emerged not merely as a study of behavior or cognition, but as a profound exploration of what it means to be human. James's legacy challenges us to remain open, to think deeply, and to live with a sense of purpose, grounded in both thought and action. Carl Rogers and client-centered therapy. Carl Rogers stands as a pivotal figure in the evolution of modern psychology, particularly known for his contributions to humanistic psychology and the development of client-centered therapy. His approach marked a significant departure from the more traditional, directive therapeutic models that dominated in the early 20th century, such as Freudian psychoanalysis and behaviorism. Where others emphasized the role of the therapist as an authoritative expert, Rogers introduced a radical idea that the client possesses within themselves the potential for personal growth and healing, and that the therapist's role is to provide the right conditions for that growth to occur. This shift was more than theoretical. It represented a transformation in how psychological care was delivered and how the therapeutic relationship was understood. Born in 1902 in Illinois, Rogers grew up in a religious and conservative household. His upbringing emphasized self-discipline and moral rectitude, but also fostered a deep introspective nature. Initially pursuing studies in agriculture and theology, Rogers eventually turned toward psychology, where he found the tools to explore human behavior through a more compassionate and empathetic lens. His academic journey led him through institutions like the University of Wisconsin and Columbia University, where he developed the foundational ideas that would later crystallize into his therapeutic method. Client-centered therapy, also known as person-centered therapy, emerged in the 1940s and represented a new paradigm in psychotherapy. At its core was the belief that individuals are inherently good and capable of self-directed growth if placed in a supportive environment. This concept, known as the actualizing tendency, posits that people have an innate drive to achieve their fullest potential. Rogers believed that this drive could flourish only under specific psychological conditions: unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence. These three components became the cornerstones of his therapeutic approach. Unconditional positive regard refers to the therapist's non-judgmental acceptance of the client, regardless of what the client says or does. This does not mean the therapist agrees with every action or belief, but rather that they respect the client's intrinsic worth as a person. Empathy involves deeply understanding the client's experiences from their perspective, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Congruence, or genuineness, requires the therapist to be authentic and transparent within the therapeutic relationship. These elements combine to create a safe and trusting environment, enabling clients to explore their thoughts and emotions without fear of judgment or rejection. Rogers' approach was revolutionary in that it democratized the therapeutic relationship. Rather than viewing the client as someone to be fixed by an expert, he saw them as the expert on their own life. The therapist's role was to facilitate self-discovery by providing support, not solutions. This respect for the client's autonomy challenged traditional power dynamics and redefined the goals of therapy, from symptom reduction to personal growth and self-understanding. One of the defining characteristics of client-centered therapy is its emphasis on the here and now. Unlike psychoanalysis, which often delved into childhood traumas and unconscious conflicts, Rogers focused on the client's current feelings and experiences. He believed that understanding and accepting one's present emotions was key to psychological healing. By helping clients become more aware of their feelings in the moment, therapists could guide them toward greater self-acceptance and clarity. Rogers also introduced the idea of the fully functioning person, a concept that described an individual who is open to experience, lives in the present, trusts their own judgment, and leads a life of meaning and purpose. This ideal was not about perfection, but about authenticity and psychological integration. It was a state of being in which the individual accepts themselves wholly, including their limitations, and lives in harmony with their values. Client-centered therapy gained widespread attention and credibility through Rogers' research and writings. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Rogers was committed to empirically validating his theories. He recorded therapy sessions, analyzed client outcomes, and published findings that demonstrated the effectiveness of his approach. This commitment to scientific rigor helped legitimize humanistic psychology within the academic and clinical communities, which had often dismissed it as overly idealistic or lacking in substance. The impact of Rogers' work extended far beyond the therapy room. His emphasis on empathy and respect influenced practices in education, leadership, conflict resolution, and even international diplomacy. In schools, his ideas helped shape student-centered learning, which values the individual needs and strengths of each learner. In the workplace, his approach encouraged managers to adopt more collaborative and inclusive leadership styles. Rogers also participated in peace efforts during the Cold War, believing that authentic dialogue grounded in empathy could bridge even the most profound ideological divides. Throughout his life, Rogers remained committed to evolving his ideas in response to new insights and challenges. He engaged with other theorists, adapted his methods for different contexts, and continued to emphasize the centrality of the human experience in all aspects of psychological work. He also acknowledged the limitations of his approach and encouraged constructive criticism as a means of refining and improving it. His humility and openness to growth reflected the very principles he championed in his therapy. The simplicity of client-centered therapy is deceptive. Beneath its gentle surface lies a profound respect for the complexity of human beings. Rogers understood that change does not come from pressure or persuasion, but from the deep and often difficult work of self-exploration. He recognized that the path to healing is not linear and that each person must walk it in their own way and at their own pace. This respect for individuality and freedom has ensured the lasting relevance of his work in a world that continues to grapple with questions of identity, meaning, and connection. Though many new forms of therapy have emerged since Rogers' time, including cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and various integrative models, his influence remains deeply embedded in the fabric of contemporary psychotherapy. The core conditions he identified are now considered essential components of any effective therapeutic relationship, regardless of the specific methodology used. His work helped to humanize the field, reminding practitioners that healing is not merely a technical endeavor, but a deeply relational and moral one. Rogers' legacy is also evident in the way therapy is understood by the general public. The image of the warm, empathetic therapist who listens without judgment owes much to his model. Popular culture often depicts therapy through a Rogersian lens, reflecting the widespread acceptance of his values. Moreover, his emphasis on self-acceptance and authenticity has resonated with broader cultural movements that promote mental health awareness and emotional literacy. In the final decades of his life, Rogers continued to explore new dimensions of human potential. He became increasingly interested in how personal transformation could lead to social change. He believed that if individuals could learn to listen to one another with empathy and respect, larger communities and societies could also evolve toward greater peace and understanding. This vision was ambitious, but it was grounded in the same faith in humanity that had informed his work from the beginning. Carl Rogers passed away in 1987, but his ideas continue to inspire and guide. His work serves as a reminder that at the heart of any therapeutic encounter lies a simple but powerful truth. People have the capacity to change, grow, and heal when they are truly heard and accepted. This belief, radical in its time, remains a cornerstone of compassionate psychological care. In sum, Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy represented a transformative moment in the history of psychology. By placing the client at the center of the therapeutic process and trusting in their inherent ability to heal, Rogers redefined what it means to help. His contributions extend beyond clinical practice, touching on education, human rights, and the broader quest for a more empathetic and humane society. His enduring influence is a testament to the depth and sincerity of his vision, and to the timeless power of empathy, authenticity, and unconditional regard in fostering genuine human connection. Alfred Adler, The Psychology of Inferiority and Superiority. Alfred Adler, an influential figure in the early development of psychology, introduced a groundbreaking framework that continues to resonate in modern thought: the psychology of inferiority and superiority. Emerging as a contemporary of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, Adler broke away from Freud's emphasis on sexual drives to propose a more holistic understanding of human behavior. He placed central importance on feelings of inferiority and the compensatory drive towards superiority, shaping what he called individual psychology. This conceptual foundation was not just a theoretical construct. It was Adler's attempt to comprehend the essence of human striving, the motivations that guide behavior, and the fundamental need for belonging and significance. Adler observed that all humans from infancy experience of smallness and dependence. This inherent vulnerability creates what he termed the inferiority complex, a universal experience rooted in our early realization of limitations. For Adler, the inferiority feeling is not inherently pathological. Rather, it is a natural condition of human development. What distinguishes one individual from another is how this feeling is addressed and compensated for. The healthy response, he argued, is a striving for superiority, not in a narcissistic or domineering sense, but as a pursuit of mastery, competence, and self-improvement. In this striving lies the potential for personal growth, creativity, and meaningful contributions to society. This drive for superiority becomes the guiding force of an individual's life, what Adler referred to as the life goal or style of life. Each person develops a unique way of responding to the challenges posed by their feelings of inferiority. Some may channel these feelings into positive ambition, cultivating resilience and excellence. Others, however, may overcompensate in maladaptive ways, leading to arrogance, contempt for others, or exaggerated self-importance, what Adler called the superiority complex. This, paradoxically, still stems from the same root of insecurity. Such individuals mask their deep-seated self-doubt with grandiosity or domination over others. In both healthy and unhealthy expressions, the core psychological tension remains: the attempt to transcend one's felt inadequacies. Adler's insight that personal development is intrinsically tied to social interest was revolutionary. He posited that true superiority is not achieved in isolation but through contributions to the welfare of others. Social interest, or Gemeinschaftsgefühl, as he called it, represents the degree to which an individual feels a sense of connection, empathy, and responsibility toward the community. For Adler, a psychologically healthy person is one who overcomes personal inferiority by striving for goals that benefit not just the self, but also others. This social perspective diverged sharply from the more individual-centric theories of his contemporaries and laid the groundwork for later humanistic psychology. Adler's ideas gained particular traction because they bridged the realms of psychology, education, and social reform. He believed that childhood experiences, especially in the family setting, were critical in shaping a person's inferiority and superiority dynamics. Birth order, for example, played a significant role in his theory. Firstborn children, often dethroned by the arrival of younger siblings, might feel a loss of power and attempt to reclaim superiority through achievement. Youngest children may become pampered and develop dependence, while middle children often strive harder to assert their unique identity. These early family dynamics form the template through which a person navigates life, perceives challenges, and seeks validation. In Adler's view, neurosis, depression, and various other psychological disturbances could often be traced back to exaggerated feelings of inferiority and distorted attempts at superiority. A person who has internalized a belief in their own inadequacy may withdraw from challenges, fearing failure and rejection. Others may compensate with aggression or obsessive ambition. In therapy, Adlerian psychologists work to uncover these patterns, helping individuals reframe their experiences and adopt healthier life goals. This therapeutic process, known as lifestyle analysis, encourages people to become more conscious of their motivations and to align their striving with socially constructive ideals. Adler's emphasis on purposeful behavior was another critical departure from deterministic models of psychology. He maintained that human behavior is not merely a reaction to past events, but is directed by goals, whether conscious or unconscious. This teleological approach asserts that individuals choose how to respond to life based on their desired ends. Thus, even the most destructive behaviors can be interpreted as misguided attempts to achieve a sense of superiority. Adler viewed human beings as fundamentally creative and capable of change, provided they gain insight into their inner dynamics and the courage to pursue new directions. Courage, in Adler's framework, plays a pivotal role. To overcome inferiority, a person must develop the courage to face life's difficulties without resorting to avoidance or false superiority. This includes accepting one's imperfections and maintaining hope in the face of adversity. Adler did not advocate for unrealistic optimism, but rather for a grounded sense of self-worth that is not dependent on comparison with others. He believed that education and early intervention could cultivate such courage, especially if children are raised in environments where they feel valued, capable, and encouraged to contribute meaningfully to the world around them. The legacy of Adler's work extends far beyond the consulting room. His theories have influenced educational systems, parenting strategies, and social welfare policies. Concepts such as encouragement, mutual respect, and democratic discipline owe much to his psychological philosophy. He was among the first to emphasize preventive mental health care, advocating for school counselors and community programs that support children's emotional development. Adler's belief in the potential for human change and growth remains a cornerstone of many modern psychological practices, including cognitive behavioral therapy and humanistic approaches. Despite his substantial contributions, Adler's work was for a time overshadowed by Freud's psychoanalysis and Jung's analytical psychology. However, in recent decades, there has been a resurgence of interest in his ideas. Scholars and practitioners recognize the prescience of his focus on social connectedness, meaning, and the individual's capacity to shape their destiny. In a world increasingly attuned to mental health and community well-being, Adler's vision appears more relevant than ever. His emphasis on cooperation over competition and contribution over dominance offers a compelling model for both individual and societal flourishing. Adler also highlighted how cultural and societal structures can exacerbate feelings of inferiority. In a competitive society that values status and material success, individuals are more prone to measuring their worth against external benchmarks. This dynamic can breed chronic dissatisfaction, anxiety, and alienation. Adler urged a shift in focus from personal gain to communal welfare, believing that the true measure of superiority lies in one's ability to uplift others. This principle challenges the notion that self-worth must be earned through achievement alone, promoting instead a model where dignity is inherent and cooperation is the path to fulfillment. A profound aspect of Adler's theory is its moral optimism. Unlike deterministic or fatalistic views of human nature, Adler believed that individuals are not doomed by their past. Even those who have developed maladaptive lifestyles can redirect their striving toward constructive ends. The therapist's role, then, is not to uncover repressed desires, but to encourage new ways of thinking, relating, and aspiring. This emphasis on empowerment makes Adlerian psychology inherently hopeful, emphasizing agency and purpose over pathology. His view of inferiority and superiority is not merely psychological, but philosophical in its implications. Adler invites us to reconsider what it means to be human. At the heart of his theory lies a recognition of shared vulnerability and the universal quest for significance. He encourages a compassionate view of others, seeing even flawed behaviors as expressions of an unmet need to belong or to matter. This humanistic stance enriches not only clinical practice, but also interpersonal relationships, community building, and leadership. In conclusion, Alfred Adler's psychology of inferiority and superiority presents a dynamic, socially attuned vision of human motivation. His theory underscores the centrality of striving, whether for betterment, connection, or contribution, as the engine of personal development. It recognizes the dual role of inferiority as both a source of suffering and a catalyst for growth. Through his integrative approach, Adler charted a path from insecurity to empowerment, from isolation to community, and from self-doubt to meaningful action. His insights remain a vital resource for understanding the complexities of the human condition, reminding us that in our striving lies not only the challenge of life, but also its deepest promise. Adler's emphasis on the individual's striving for meaning and significance set him apart from many thinkers of his time. While Freud concentrated on unconscious drives and Jung explored archetypes and the collective unconscious, Adler focused on the conscious goals individuals pursue and how these shape behavior. This future-oriented perspective brought with it a profound shift in therapeutic thinking, suggesting that human beings are not merely products of their past, but architects of their future. In doing so, Adler laid a foundation for a psychology deeply rooted in purpose, choice, and social engagement. A crucial dimension of Adler's theory is its emphasis on context. He believed that no psychological issue could be understood in isolation from the social environment. Inferiority feelings are often intensified not by internal flaws, but by external pressures, poverty, discrimination, neglect, or unrealistic societal expectations. Children raised in environments where they are consistently compared to others or belittled for their shortcomings often internalize a sense of worthlessness. Adler argued that when such individuals grow up, their behaviors, ranging from excessive ambition to social withdrawal, can be understood as attempts to regain lost dignity and affirm their value. This relational perspective has had a significant influence on community psychology and social work, where the interplay between individual struggles and societal conditions is a key area of focus. Furthermore, Adler's concept of fictional finalism, a term he used to describe the idealized life goals that guide people's actions, adds another layer to his understanding of motivation. These fictions are not lies, but rather imagined ideals that individuals use to give structure and meaning to their lives. For example, a person might unconsciously adopt the belief that I must be perfect to be loved, or if I am not the best, I am nothing. These beliefs then shape decision-making, relationships, and self-image. The problem arises when such guiding fictions are rigid, unrealistic, or self-defeating. Adlerian therapy seeks to make these beliefs conscious and subject to reevaluation. Once a person understands the unrealistic nature of their guiding fiction, they are empowered to replace it with healthier, more attainable goals. In recognizing the diversity of human experience, Adler was ahead of his time. He emphasized the uniqueness of every individual and rejected the idea of a one-size-fits-all psychological model. Each person develops a distinctive style of life shaped by early experiences, family dynamics, and cultural influences. This style of life is not merely a collection of behaviors, but a deeply embedded worldview, a pattern of interpreting life events and responding to them. Even identical circumstances may produce entirely different reactions in two individuals based on the meanings they assign to their experiences. Adler's approach encourages therapists to approach each person without preconceived notions, listening carefully to their personal narrative and understanding their subjective reality. Adler also championed the importance of early childhood in the development of psychological patterns. While this idea was not unique to him, his interpretation differed from that of his contemporaries. He believed that children are not passive recipients of experience, but active interpreters. They develop beliefs about themselves and the world not solely from what happens to them, but from how they perceive what happens. A child who perceives themselves as overlooked or undervalued may adopt a compensatory role, perhaps becoming a high achiever to gain recognition, or conversely, a rebel to assert identity. Understanding these early interpretations is key to unraveling adult behavior, as they often form the bedrock of one's striving for superiority or expressions of inferiority. Education was another arena where Adler's insights found practical application. He believed that the classroom should be a place where students are not only educated intellectually, but supported emotionally. A teacher who fosters encouragement rather than competition can help students develop a healthy sense of self-worth and community feeling. Adler opposed punitive methods and advocated for discipline rooted in respect and empathy. He saw teachers as vital agents of social interest, capable of instilling in children a sense of belonging, responsibility, and contribution. His approach influenced progressive educational reforms and inspired educators to view behavioral problems not as defects to be punished, but as signs of unmet needs and mistaken goals. One of the most humane aspects of Adler's theory is its emphasis on encouragement. Encouragement, in Adler's view, is the antidote to inferiority. It is through the process of being encouraged and encouraging others that individuals find the courage to face challenges and develop resilience. Unlike praise, which is often conditional and outcome-based, encouragement focuses on effort, improvement, and intrinsic worth. A discouraged person is one who feels they cannot meet life's demands. Through encouragement, they begin to see their capabilities and reclaim a sense of agency. This principle has influenced therapeutic practices, parenting methods, and leadership strategies that aim to build people up rather than exert control over them. Adler also paid close attention to the roles of masculinity and femininity in shaping inferiority and superiority dynamics. In a society where gender roles were rigid and hierarchical, he noted that women were often made to feel inferior simply because of their gender. This socially imposed inferiority, he argued, led some women to overcompensate through exaggerated ambition or rejection of traditional roles. Conversely, some men might develop superiority complexes as a way to reinforce their dominance in a system that rewards male assertiveness. Adler's acknowledgement of these gender dynamics made his theory especially adaptable to discussions around equality, feminism, and evolving gender identities. His work encouraged psychologists and educators to question societal norms and examine how systemic biases impact personal development. In the realm of group dynamics and leadership, Adler's principles offer profound insights. Leaders driven by a genuine sense of social interest, rather than personal power, tend to inspire loyalty and cooperation. They lead by example and focus on uplifting others rather than asserting dominance. Adler understood that true leadership involves fostering a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect. In contrast, leaders with unaddressed inferiority complexes may seek validation through control, status, or rigid hierarchies, often to the detriment of group cohesion and morale. Applying Adlerian psychology in organizational settings thus offers a roadmap for creating more collaborative and emotionally intelligent environments. Adler's work also intersects with existential psychology in its focus on meaning, choice, and responsibility. He believed that people are constantly engaged in the task of creating a meaningful life in the face of limitations. This philosophical orientation sees life as a journey toward becoming one's best self, not in comparison to others, but in service of one's values and community. Striving for superiority, then, is not about winning, but about becoming whole. It is the inner drive to overcome internal and external obstacles and to live in harmony with one's principles. This idea continues to resonate with those seeking purpose and direction in an increasingly fragmented and fast-paced world. In therapeutic contexts, Adlerian psychology is notable for its collaborative spirit. The therapist is not a detached expert, but a fellow human being working alongside the client to explore patterns and possibilities. This egalitarian approach reflects Adler's belief in the fundamental equality of all people. The therapeutic relationship becomes a space where clients can explore their private logic, the unique beliefs and assumptions that shape their lives, and begin to revise them in ways that foster growth. Therapy is less about diagnosis and more about dialogue, insight, and action. It encourages clients to take ownership of their lives while recognizing the social systems that support or hinder their progress. Adler's optimism about human nature was not naive. It was grounded in his observations of how people, when supported and understood, are capable of remarkable transformation. He saw potential even in those considered deeply troubled, believing that all behavior is purposeful and meaningful when properly understood. This respectful stance toward human suffering, viewing it not as a sign of weakness but as a message to be deciphered, makes Adler's theory deeply compassionate and empowering. It calls on both individuals and societies to create environments that nurture growth, cooperation, and mutual respect. Today, in an age marked by increasing isolation, competition, and mental health challenges, Adler's vision offers a counterpoint of hope and connectedness. His insistence on the value of social interest reminds us that healing and growth are not solely personal endeavors, but collective ones. When individuals feel seen, supported, and capable of contributing, they not only overcome their own struggles, but also help others do the same. In this light, Adler's psychology becomes more than a therapeutic tool. It becomes a philosophy of living, a guide for building communities where everyone has the chance to strive, to belong, and to matter. In summation, Alfred Adler's exploration of inferiority and superiority captures the essence of human striving in all its complexity. His ideas encompass the personal and the social, the psychological and the ethical, offering a deeply integrated view of what it means to be human. From childhood development to adult relationships, from education to leadership, his insights continue to inform and inspire. They remind us that at the heart of every person lies a desire to overcome, to connect, and to create a life of significance. Through understanding and addressing these core dynamics, Adler's legacy endures as a timeless call to empathy, courage, and purposeful living. Elizabeth Loftus and the Fragility of Memory. Elizabeth Loftus stands as one of the most influential and controversial figures in the study of human memory. Her groundbreaking research has significantly reshaped how we understand the workings of memory, particularly in the context of eyewitness testimony and the legal system. As a cognitive psychologist, Loftus has devoted her career to exploring the mechanisms of memory formation, distortion, and recall, unveiling unsettling truths about how unreliable our memories can be. Her findings have profound implications, not just for psychology, but also for law, education, and society at large. The fragility of memory is a central theme in Loftus's research. Contrary to the traditional belief that memory functions as a sort of mental recording device that accurately captures and stores information, Loftus has demonstrated that memory is far more reconstructive than reproductive. That is, people do not replay memories as they would a video. Instead, they piece together fragments of past experiences, often unconsciously blending them with new information or suggestions. This means that what we remember is not always what actually happened, but rather what our minds have constructed over time. One of the most notable contributions Elizabeth Loftus made to the understanding of memory came from her experiments involving the misinformation effect. In a series of studies, she showed how the wording of a question could alter a participant's recollection of an event. For instance, when participants were shown footage of a car accident and then asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other versus when they hit each other, those exposed to the word smashed tended to report higher speeds and even imagined broken glass that wasn't present. These subtle shifts in language demonstrated that even minor suggestions could lead people to remember things inaccurately. Her work didn't stop at laboratory experiments. Loftus brought her findings into the real world by examining legal cases where eyewitness testimony played a central role. Her expert witness testimony in numerous trials has highlighted the fallibility of memory and raised questions about the reliability of victims' and witnesses' recollections. In cases where someone's future and freedom rest heavily on what others claim to remember, Loftus's work urges a more cautious and scientifically informed approach. Memory, as she has proven time and again, is not immune to external influences. It can be manipulated, altered, and even entirely fabricated under certain conditions. Perhaps the most striking and controversial aspect of Loftus's work deals with the phenomenon of false memories, entirely fabricated recollections of events that never actually occurred. In the now famous Lost in the Mall experiment, she and her colleagues were able to convince participants that they had been lost in a shopping mall as children, even though this had never happened. This revelation sent shockwaves through both the psychological community and the broader public, raising uncomfortable questions about the reliability of personal memory and its susceptibility to suggestion. Loftus's research became particularly significant during the wave of recovered memory cases in the 1980s and 1990s, where individuals began recalling traumatic events from their childhoods, often during therapy sessions. Many of these recovered memories involved claims of abuse and led to criminal trials. While some of these memories were undoubtedly rooted in real trauma, Loftus's work suggested that some could have been inadvertently implanted by well-meaning therapists using suggestive techniques. This placed her at the center of a heated and emotionally charged debate, pitting the rights and voices of alleged victims against the integrity of scientific evidence and due process. Her involvement in these cases earned her both accolades and criticism. Advocates for victims sometimes accused her of undermining legitimate claims of trauma, while legal professionals and fellow scientists praised her for bringing empirical scrutiny to emotionally charged and legally complex situations. Despite the backlash, Loftus remained steadfast in her commitment to scientific rigor and ethical responsibility. She emphasized that acknowledging the fallibility of memory does not mean dismissing all claims of abuse or trauma, but rather calls for more thorough methods of corroboration and investigation. Elizabeth Loftus has consistently advocated for a balanced perspective, urging both legal professionals and the public to appreciate the complexity of memory. She reminds us that the brain is not a perfect storage system. Memory can fade over time, be contaminated by outside information, or become distorted through repetition and retelling. This fragility is not a flaw of character or intent. It is a fundamental aspect of how human cognition works. Understanding this can help society develop better procedures for interviewing witnesses, collecting testimony, and conducting investigations. Loftus's influence extends beyond the courtroom and into the realms of education and public awareness. Through her lectures, writings, and media appearances, she has brought the science of memory to a broader audience, challenging assumptions and encouraging critical thinking. Her work encourages people to question the reliability of their own memories and to approach others' recollections with a healthy degree of skepticism, especially in high-stakes situations. Moreover, her contributions have prompted the development of more refined protocols in law enforcement, such as the implementation of cognitive interview techniques designed to minimize suggestion and improve the accuracy of witness recollections. Courts in various jurisdictions have also become more cautious in relying solely on eyewitness accounts, especially when no corroborating evidence is present. These shifts reflect a growing recognition of the scientific insights pioneered by Loftus and her colleagues. Elizabeth Loftus has also opened important philosophical and ethical discussions about identity, truth, and justice. If memories can be altered or even fabricated, what does that mean for our understanding of personal history and accountability? How do we determine what is real when even our minds can betray us? These questions may not have simple answers, but they are essential for navigating a world where memory plays such a central role in shaping beliefs, decisions, and institutions. Despite the controversies, Loftus's contributions to psychology have been widely recognized. She has received numerous awards and honors, including election to the National Academy of Sciences and several honorary degrees. Her influence spans disciplines, informing work in law, education, healthcare, and media. At the heart of her impact is a relentless pursuit of truth, guided by empirical evidence and a deep concern for justice. Elizabeth Loftus's legacy challenges society to confront the uncomfortable reality that memory, though deeply personal and often cherished, is not always accurate. She has illuminated the ways in which memory can be shaped by suggestion, time, and social influence, underscoring the need for safeguards against these vulnerabilities. Her research underscores that memory is not a static archive, but a dynamic process, continually updated and reshaped by experience and context. In a world increasingly dominated by information, narratives, and personal testimony, Loftus's work serves as a powerful reminder that what we remember is not always what happened. This insight holds immense implications for anyone seeking to understand human behavior, resolve conflicts, or administer justice. By challenging widely held assumptions about the reliability of memory, Elizabeth Loftus has not only reshaped the field of psychology, but also contributed to a broader, more nuanced understanding of human cognition. Through decades of research and advocacy, Loftus has shown that while memory is a cornerstone of human experience, it is also vulnerable to distortion and decay. Her work invites us to respect the power of memory while remaining vigilant about its limitations. In doing so, she has helped to cultivate a more informed and thoughtful society, one that is better equipped to discern truth in a world where perception and reality often blur. Stanley Milgram and the Obedience Experiments. Stanley Milgram, a renowned American social psychologist, is most famously known for his controversial yet groundbreaking obedience experiments conducted in the early 1960s. These experiments, designed to measure the willingness of participants to obey authority figures, even when it involved harming another person, have left an indelible mark on the field of social psychology. Milgram's work emerged during a period of intense reflection on human nature and morality, especially in the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust. He sought to understand how ordinary individuals could commit acts of cruelty simply by following orders, a question that struck at the heart of post-war ethical and philosophical discussions. The context that inspired Milgram's study was deeply rooted in the atrocities committed during the Nazi era. The Nuremberg trials had recently concluded, and many war criminals defended their actions by claiming they were merely following orders. This defense of obedience to authority prompted scholars and psychologists to question the nature of human behavior in hierarchical structures. Milgram, motivated by these historical events, hypothesized that people have a strong tendency to comply with authority figures, even when it conflicts with their personal conscience. To investigate this hypothesis, he designed an experiment that would simulate the conditions of authority and submission in a controlled setting. Milgram conducted his first series of experiments at Yale University in 1961. Participants were recruited through newspaper advertisements and were told they would be taking part in a study about memory and learning. They were introduced to a confederate, an actor who pretended to be another participant. Through a rigged draw, the real participant was always assigned the role of the teacher, while the confederate was assigned the role of the learner. The teacher was instructed to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to the learner whenever they gave a wrong answer to a question. The shocks were not real, but the teacher was unaware of this and believed they were actually hurting the learner. The shock generator used in the experiment was labeled with voltages ranging from 15 to 450 volts, with corresponding verbal descriptions such as slight shock, moderate shock, danger, severe shock, and finally, XXX. As the learner began to make deliberate mistakes, the teacher was encouraged by an authoritative figure, dressed in a lab coat and portraying a scientific researcher, to continue administering shocks. The learner, sitting in another room, responded with pre-recorded screams of pain, pleas to stop, and eventually complete silence, simulating unconsciousness or worse. Despite the apparent distress of the learner, many participants continued to follow the instructions of the experimenter, administering what they believed to be life-threatening shocks. Milgram was astonished by the results. A significant majority of participants, around 65%, obeyed the experimenter's instructions to the very end, administering the maximum 450-volt shock. These findings revealed a disturbing tendency among ordinary people to obey authority, even at the expense of another person's well-being. The implications of this experiment were profound, suggesting that under certain conditions, average individuals could commit acts of cruelty simply because they were instructed to do so by an authority figure. The public and academic reactions to Milgram's findings were mixed. While many praised the experiments for shedding light on the mechanisms of obedience and authority, others criticized them on ethical grounds. The emotional stress experienced by participants was considerable, with some displaying signs of intense nervousness, sweating, trembling, and even laughter brought on by extreme tension. Milgram defended his methodology by arguing that the psychological insights gained outweighed the temporary distress caused to the participants. He also emphasized that most participants later reported being glad to have taken part in the study, having learned something significant about themselves and human behavior. Despite the controversy, Milgram's work had a lasting impact on psychology, ethics in research, and our understanding of authority. The obedience experiments have since been replicated in various forms with similar results obtained across cultures and time periods. These replications have reinforced the robustness of Milgram's original findings, highlighting the universality of obedience to authority in human societies. The experiments have also led to significant changes in ethical standards for psychological research, prompting the development of more stringent guidelines to protect participants from harm. One of the enduring questions raised by Milgram's research is the extent to which people are responsible for actions carried out under authority. His work challenges the notion of individual moral agency, suggesting that the presence of an authoritative command can significantly alter one's sense of responsibility. This insight has been applied to various domains, from military conduct to corporate behavior, where higher hierarchical structures often demand obedience. The experiments have been used to explain how otherwise decent individuals may participate in harmful actions when they believe they are just following orders, a phenomenon with far-reaching social and ethical implications. Milgram's interpretation of his results emphasized the power of the situation over individual personality traits. He argued that the social environment and perceived legitimacy of authority could lead people to act in ways that were contrary to their personal values. This perspective aligned with the growing interest in situational explanations for behavior in social psychology, contrasting with earlier views that focused heavily on internal dispositions. Milgram's work, along with that of other psychologists like Philip Zimbardo, contributed to a shift in focus toward understanding the situational variables that influence human behavior. Another notable aspect of Milgram's experiments was the illusion of scientific legitimacy. The presence of the lab coat, the formal setting of Yale University, and the use of technical language all contributed to the participants' willingness to comply. The experiment highlighted how symbols of authority and institutional prestige can strongly influence people's actions. This finding has resonated in analyses of bureaucratic systems and has informed training programs aimed at promoting ethical decision-making in professional settings. The legacy of Milgram's work also extends into popular culture and education. His experiments have been dramatized in films, documentaries, and television shows, often as a means of exploring the darker aspects of human nature. These portrayals underscore the continuing relevance of his research in understanding current events and historical atrocities. By demonstrating how easily people can be led to harm others under authority, Milgram's experiments serve as a cautionary tale about the importance of critical thinking and moral courage. Although the obedience studies are often the centerpiece of Milgram's legacy, they also led to broader questions about conformity, social influence, and personal autonomy. His findings suggested that social norms and expectations play a powerful role in shaping individual behavior, often in ways that people are not fully conscious of. This insight has influenced research in areas such as organizational behavior, education, and political science, where understanding the dynamics of influence and compliance is crucial. Over the years, scholars have continued to debate the ethical and methodological aspects of Milgram's research. Some argue that the deception involved was too great a cost, while others maintain that the knowledge gained was invaluable. The discussion around these experiments has helped to refine the ethical frameworks used in psychological research, leading to a greater emphasis on informed consent, debriefing, and minimizing harm. These developments have helped ensure that future studies uphold the dignity and welfare of participants while still advancing scientific understanding. Milgram's obedience experiments remain one of the most cited and discussed studies in the history of psychology. They have sparked decades of research, debate, and reflection on the nature of authority, morality, and human behavior. The simplicity of the experiment's design, coupled with its profound implications, has made it a touchstone in both academic and public discourse. It serves as a reminder of the importance of questioning authority, recognizing the influence of situational factors and cultivating an ethical awareness that can resist unjust commands. In the broader context of human history, Milgram's experiments provide a psychological explanation for many troubling episodes, offering a framework to understand how ordinary people can become agents of harm when placed in certain social structures. His work has encouraged educators, policymakers, and leaders to examine how authority is exercised and to build systems that promote accountability and ethical responsibility. By shining a light on the mechanisms of obedience, Milgram challenged society to reflect on the balance between authority and conscience, a reflection that remains as relevant today as it was in the 1960s. Ultimately, Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments are not merely historical footnotes, but enduring inquiries into the human condition. They raise uncomfortable yet necessary questions about the ease with which ethical boundaries can be crossed under pressure. While the world has changed significantly since Milgram's time, the fundamental insights gleaned from his research continue to resonate. They urge a constant vigilance against the blind submission to authority and highlight the vital importance of individual moral judgment in maintaining humane and just societies. Philip Zimbardo and the Stanford Prison Experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, remains one of the most significant and controversial studies in the field of social psychology. Designed to explore the psychological effects of perceived power, especially the struggle between prisoners and prison officers, the experiment took place in a simulated prison environment set up in the basement of Stanford University's psychology building. Zimbardo, a prominent professor at the time, sought to understand how individuals adapt to roles of authority and submission in an institutional setting. His study was rooted in an interest in understanding how good people can turn evil under specific social conditions, inspired partly by historical events where ordinary individuals committed atrocities under authoritative regimes. Zimbardo and his research team carefully selected 24 male college students from a large pool of volunteers. These participants were deemed psychologically and physically healthy and were randomly assigned to play either the role of a guard or a prisoner. This random assignment was meant to ensure that personality traits did not influence the outcome, allowing the researchers to observe the behavioral effects of the prison environment and assigned roles alone. The participants were to take part in the simulation for 2 weeks, with guards working in shifts and prisoners remaining in the makeshift prison 24 hours a day. What unfolded, however, quickly escalated beyond the researchers' expectations. On the first day, the situation remained relatively controlled, but it did not take long for the dynamics to shift dramatically. Guards began to assert dominance in increasingly aggressive ways, inventing arbitrary rules and humiliating the prisoners. Although the guards were told they could not use physical violence, they quickly adopted psychological tactics to maintain control. Prisoners were stripped of their identities, referred to only by numbers, and forced into degrading activities. This stripping away of personal identity and autonomy had a profound psychological effect, not only on the prisoners, but also on the guards, who began to exhibit authoritarian and, in some cases, sadistic behavior. The environment cultivated a sense of dehumanization, where individuals no longer saw each other as equals, but rather as roles to be obeyed or controlled. The participants internalized their roles far more deeply than Zimbardo had anticipated. Some prisoners broke down emotionally, experiencing extreme stress, anxiety, and helplessness. One participant had to be removed after just 36 hours due to a severe emotional breakdown. Others passively accepted the abuse, highlighting the psychological toll of institutional environments and perceived powerlessness. The guards, many of whom had previously displayed no signs of cruelty or aggression, became increasingly cruel as the experiment progressed. They devised creative punishments, implemented isolation tactics, and used sleep deprivation as a form of control. These behaviors evolved not under coercion, but through the power bestowed upon them by the structure of the experiment. Zimbardo himself took on the role of the prison superintendent, further blurring the lines between researcher and participant. In doing so, he became part of the simulated system he had designed, which compromised his objectivity. Rather than stepping in to stop the abuses, he allowed them to continue under the belief that the study needed to run its course. It wasn't until an outsider, a fellow psychologist and Zimbardo's then-girlfriend Christina Maslach, visited the site and expressed shock and outrage at what she witnessed that Zimbardo recognized the severity of the situation. Her reaction served as a critical mirror, prompting Zimbardo to call off the experiment after only 6 days. The aftermath of the Stanford Prison Experiment sparked widespread debate in both academic and public spheres. Critics argued that the study lacked proper ethical oversight and that the participants were exposed to undue psychological harm. The American Psychological Association later revised its guidelines for human experimentation in response to concerns raised by this and similar studies. Despite its controversies, the experiment provided powerful insights into how environments and systems can shape human behavior in profound and often disturbing ways. It demonstrated that ordinary individuals, when placed in positions of power within a dehumanizing context, could commit acts they might otherwise find reprehensible. Zimbardo defended the experiment as a necessary and enlightening exploration into the darker side of human nature. He emphasized that the results underscored the importance of context in influencing behavior. The findings aligned with other psychological studies, such as Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments, which similarly showed how individuals might follow orders that conflict with their moral beliefs when under the influence of authority. Together, these studies contributed to a broader understanding of conformity, obedience, and the potential for systemic abuse. The Stanford Prison Experiment has been widely referenced in psychology textbooks, documentaries, and academic discussions. It also served as inspiration for various films and theatrical portrayals, often highlighting its disturbing implications. Zimbardo later reflected on the ethical shortcomings of the study and became an advocate for prison reform and better ethical practices in psychological research. He founded the Heroic Imagination Project, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting positive social change and teaching individuals how to resist negative group influences. One of the lasting legacies of the experiment is its contribution to the field of social psychology, particularly in the study of situational versus dispositional behavior. It challenged the notion that evil acts are carried out solely by inherently bad individuals. Instead, it proposed that under certain situational pressures and environmental cues, even well-adjusted people can be led to act in harmful ways. This insight has been used to better understand including prison abuses, wartime atrocities, and systemic injustices. While the Stanford Prison Experiment remains a powerful teaching tool, it is also a cautionary tale about the responsibilities of researchers and the potential for harm in the pursuit of knowledge. The lack of informed consent regarding the true potential dangers, the absence of oversight during the course of the experiment, and the emotional trauma endured by the participants are all critical issues that have led to its condemnation in some academic circles. Yet it is this very controversy that has kept the experiment relevant decades after it occurred. It forces educators, students, and researchers to grapple with difficult questions about ethics, authority, and the fragility of moral behavior under pressure. In more recent years, the validity of the experiment has been re-examined. Some researchers have questioned whether the guards were truly acting independently or were subtly guided by the experimenters. Zimbardo has acknowledged that he gave the guards a certain level of freedom, but has also maintained that their behavior arose organically from the situation. Regardless of where one stands on these debates, the study's impact on the discipline of psychology is undeniable. It opened up a new realm of inquiry into the effects of institutional power and the vulnerability of the human psyche when placed under stress and stripped of autonomy. The experiment also brought attention to the U.S. prison system, sparking discussions about the treatment of inmates and the psychological toll of incarceration. In many ways, the study predicted real-world abuses seen in prisons and detention centers, where unchecked power and lack of oversight can lead to mistreatment. Zimbardo later testified before Congress on prison reform and continued to engage in public discourse about the moral responsibilities of those in authority. His transition from experimenter to advocate added another dimension to his legacy and highlighted the importance of learning from one's mistakes. Educational institutions around the world have used the Stanford Prison Experiment as a case study not only in psychology, but also in ethics, sociology, and criminology. It serves as a poignant example of how systemic structures can foster behavior that goes against personal values and societal norms. The lesson is not just about the behavior of the guards or the suffering of the prisoners, but about the broader systems that enable such dynamics to emerge. This perspective encourages students and professionals alike to critically assess the environments they operate in and to resist becoming passive actors within flawed systems. Ultimately, the Stanford Prison Experiment stands as a stark reminder of the power of situational forces. It reveals the capacity for cruelty that lies dormant in ordinary individuals when placed within authoritarian structures. At the same time, it offers hope in the form of those who resisted the pressures, like the whistleblower who ended the experiment early. Zimbardo's work, controversial as it may be, underscores the need for vigilance in preserving human dignity, especially within systems of power. Through this lens, the study continues to provoke reflection, urging society to examine not only what people do, but the circumstances that lead them to do it. Noam Chomsky's influence on cognitive psychology. Noam Chomsky, a towering figure in the landscape of intellectual thought, has left a profound and lasting impact on the field of cognitive psychology. His groundbreaking work in linguistics catalyzed a revolution that fundamentally changed how researchers understood the mind, language, and mental processes. While Chomsky's primary domain has been linguistics, the ripple effects of his ideas have penetrated deep into psychology, especially cognitive psychology, reshaping its paradigms and challenging long-standing assumptions. In the mid-20th century, behaviorism dominated American psychology. The behaviorist approach, championed by scholars like B.F. Skinner, emphasized observable behavior over internal mental processes. Behaviorists believe that psychology should concern itself only with what could be seen and measured: stimuli, responses, and reinforcement patterns. Mental states, thoughts, or intentions were considered unscientific or even irrelevant for psychological inquiry. This environment left little room for introspective analyses or theoretical constructs about the mind. It was into this intellectually rigid atmosphere that Chomsky introduced his transformative critique. Chomsky's critical review of B.F. Skinner's book Verbal Behavior in 1959 is often cited as the starting point of the cognitive revolution. In that review, Chomsky systematically dismantled Skinner's behaviorist interpretation of language acquisition. He argued that behaviorism could not adequately explain the rapid and creative way in which children learn language. According to Chomsky, language acquisition is not merely the result of conditioning or reinforcement, but involves innate cognitive structures. This idea challenged the core of behaviorist thinking and laid the foundation for a new approach that considered internal mental mechanisms. Chomsky introduced the theory of a universal grammar, proposing that all human languages share a common underlying structure and that the ability to learn language is hardwired into the human brain. This concept suggested that humans are born with a specific set of linguistic principles that guide language development, a radical departure from the belief that language learning was purely environmental. Cognitive psychologists found this notion incredibly compelling, as it provided a tangible link between mental processes and observable behavior. The idea that mental faculties shape how we acquire and use language opened the door to studying cognition in a systematic and scientific way. The implications of Chomsky's theories went far beyond linguistics. By emphasizing the role of innate cognitive structures, he revived interest in the mind as a legitimate focus of scientific study. This shift helped bring about the cognitive revolution, during which psychology began to re-embrace mental processes such as perception, memory, problem-solving, and reasoning. Chomsky's work served as a beacon for this new generation of researchers, encouraging them to construct models of the mind that could be empirically tested, much like theories in the natural sciences. Another pivotal aspect of Chomsky's influence lies in his use of formal systems to describe mental processes. He utilized tools from mathematics and logic to build models of syntactic structures, showcasing that mental processes could be analyzed with rigor and precision. This approach resonated strongly with cognitive psychologists, many of whom adopted similar methodologies to investigate areas like memory encoding, attention, and decision making. His formal grammar models became instrumental in developing computational theories of mind, which later formed the basis for cognitive science as a multidisciplinary field involving psychology, computer science, linguistics, and neuroscience. Chomsky's influence also intersected with developments in artificial intelligence and computer science. His theories about language and mind inspired early work in natural language processing, a subfield of AI concerned with enabling machines to understand and generate human language. Researchers began designing computational models that mimicked aspects of human linguistic competence, drawing directly from Chomsky's theories. This interdisciplinary approach enriched cognitive psychology, fostering collaborations that expanded the scope and methodology of mental process research. Throughout his career, Chomsky maintained a consistent focus on the generative aspect of human cognition. He argued that the mind is not a passive receiver of information, but an active generator of meaning and structure. This perspective resonated deeply with cognitive psychologists who were exploring how people construct knowledge from experience. The notion that the mind contains generative mechanisms provided a framework for understanding higher-level cognitive functions such as creativity, planning, and abstract thinking. Chomsky's emphasis on internal representations and rule-governed mental activity helped shape theoretical models that are still influential today. Importantly, Chomsky's work helped shift the scientific conversation toward understanding the mind as an information processing system. This metaphor of the mind as a computer, receiving inputs, processing data, and producing outputs, became a foundational idea in cognitive psychology. His emphasis on modularity, the idea that different cognitive functions operate in specialized and relatively independent systems, further inspired psychological models that parse the mind into distinct components. This has led to more nuanced understandings of mental disorders, developmental processes, and neural functioning. Despite his enormous contributions, Chomsky has remained critical of certain trends within cognitive psychology and related disciplines. He has often voiced skepticism about the explanatory power of purely statistical models of cognition, which sometimes ignore underlying mental structures. While appreciating empirical rigor, Chomsky has consistently argued that any true science of the mind must address the deep structural principles that underlie human cognition. His philosophical rigor has kept debates alive and sharpened the theoretical edges of psychological inquiry, encouraging ongoing refinement and self-examination within the field. Chomsky's legacy in cognitive psychology is also evident in the pedagogical realm. His ideas have influenced curricula in psychology and linguistics departments around the world, training generations of students to think critically about the mind. His clear and rigorous approach to theory construction has become a model for scholarly inquiry, emphasizing clarity, precision, and logical coherence. Many cognitive psychology textbooks and academic programs owe a significant intellectual debt to the foundations he helped establish. Moreover, Chomsky's work has stimulated a broader philosophical discourse on human nature, free will, and consciousness. His insistence on the uniqueness of human cognition and language has led to rich dialogues about what sets humans apart from other species. These discussions have implications not only for psychology, but also for anthropology, education, and ethics. By framing language as a window into the mind, Chomsky has encouraged scholars across disciplines to explore the fundamental nature of thought, understanding, and communication. The ripple effects of Chomsky's influence continue to be felt in contemporary research. Modern cognitive neuroscience, which seeks to link brain activity with cognitive function, often operates on principles that align with Chomskyan theory. For instance, research on the neural basis of language processing has uncovered evidence for specialized brain regions involved in syntactic and semantic analysis, echoing the modular view that Chomsky advocated. Advances in imaging technologies such as fMRI and EEG have provided empirical support for many of the mental structures and processes he theorized, lending credence to his conceptual models. Chomsky's contributions also resonate in developmental psychology, particularly in the study of how infants acquire language. Studies have shown that even newborns possess a sensitivity to linguistic patterns, supporting the idea of innate cognitive frameworks. These findings reinforce Chomsky's hypothesis that the mind is equipped with built-in mechanisms for language and cognition, further bridging theoretical and empirical research. While his theories have evolved and been contested over the decades, Chomsky's core insight that the human mind contains inherent structures that shape our experience and behavior remains a cornerstone of cognitive psychology. His insistence on scientific rigor, theoretical clarity, and intellectual honesty has elevated the discipline and inspired countless scholars to pursue a deeper understanding of the human mind. His work continues to serve as both a foundation and a provocation, challenging researchers to refine their models and expand their horizons. In sum, Noam Chomsky's influence on cognitive psychology is both profound and multifaceted. He reoriented the field away from behaviorism reductionism and toward a nuanced appreciation of the mind's internal architecture. His theories sparked a cognitive revolution that reshaped psychology into a discipline capable of grappling with complex mental phenomena. By bridging linguistics, philosophy, and psychology, Chomsky forged a new path for understanding human cognition, one that continues to guide and inspire research today. Through his intellect and determination, he helped redefine not only how we study the mind, but also how we understand what it means to be human. Chomsky's influence, while initially met with resistance by some in the psychological community, gradually permeated academic institutions and research programs across the globe. This was not merely due to the boldness of his critiques, but because his ideas offered a fertile framework from which novel hypotheses could emerge and be empirically tested. As the field of psychology matured in the latter half of the 20th century, researchers found that Chomsky's propositions opened new avenues for inquiry into how the brain processes symbols, rules, and meanings, a radical shift from the empirical constraints that had previously dominated psychological research. One of the more subtle yet profound shifts initiated by Chomsky's work was the transition from a surface-level analysis of behavior to a deep structural analysis of cognitive systems. In doing so, he emphasized the distinction between competence, the mental capacity to generate and comprehend language, and performance, which refers to the actual use of language in real-world scenarios, often affected by memory limitations, distractions, and social context. This dichotomy introduced a new lens through which cognitive psychologists could evaluate human functioning, allowing them to separate innate mental faculties from situational variables. It provided a methodology to study mental systems without being entirely confined by the imperfections of human behavior in natural environments. Cognitive psychology, under the light of Chomskyan theory, began to incorporate more abstract constructs such as mental representations, propositional logic, and hierarchical rule systems into its frameworks. These constructs allowed researchers to build more comprehensive theories of learning, understanding, and memory formation. While behaviorists had largely focused on conditioning as a mechanism for learning, Chomsky's model encouraged the idea that learning involves active rule extraction, hypothesis testing, and pattern recognition, processes that can operate independently of direct reinforcement. This greatly expanded the theoretical scope of cognitive psychology, providing a richer tapestry of mental phenomena to explore. Chomsky's work also contributed to a more nuanced understanding of language disorders and their cognitive roots. Disorders like aphasia, dyslexia, and specific language impairment, SLI, began to be studied not merely as deviations in behavior, but as disruptions in the cognitive structures Chomsky had theorized. Researchers start exploring how impairments in syntactic processing or grammatical intuition could reflect anomalies in the neurological architecture responsible for language. This medical and cognitive approach further blurred the lines between psychology, linguistics, and neuroscience, fostering a more integrated approach to understanding the mind. In educational psychology, Chomsky's theories found a unique application. His view that language development arises from internal mechanisms provided a counterbalance to purely environmental or pedagogical explanations of learning. It encouraged educators and curriculum designers to consider the natural developmental stages of the mind. Rather than overwhelming students with rote memorization or repetition, learning environments began to focus more on discovery, structure, and meaning. This philosophical shift had implications beyond language education. It began influencing how science, mathematics, and even moral reasoning were taught by aligning teaching methods with the brain's inherent capacities to recognize patterns and generate abstractions. The implications of Chomsky's theories extended even into developmental psychology, reshaping how theorists understood the milestones of childhood growth. Jean Piaget's constructivist views had long dominated the discourse, but Chomsky introduced a complementary perspective that development is not solely the accumulation of experiences, but also the unfolding of pre-programmed mental faculties. This insight led to an increased focus on early childhood as a critical period for cognitive and linguistic development. Researchers began designing longitudinal studies to explore how language exposure interacts with innate capacities, producing findings that continue to inform policy, pediatric practice, and early intervention strategies. Chomsky's impact also reached into the philosophical domain of mind and consciousness, stimulating dialogue around the nature of mental causality, intention, and subjectivity. His sharp distinction between surface phenomena and underlying mental structures resonated with philosophers of mind who sought to understand consciousness not as a passive reflection of reality, but as an active construction. These conversations fed back into psychology, prompting deeper questions about the limits of introspection, the reliability of perception, and the architecture of thought. By grounding these discussions in linguistic theory, Chomsky provided a scaffold for integrating empirical psychology with abstract philosophical inquiry. Chomsky's theoretical rigor also helped usher in a greater emphasis on interdisciplinary collaboration. As cognitive psychology began to align more closely with computer science, biology, and philosophy, Chomsky's insistence on systematic, formal models laid the groundwork for a shared language among disciplines. Cognitive scientists borrowed from his formal grammars to build artificial neural networks and machine learning algorithms designed to simulate human-like understanding. These computational models, while not perfect replicas of human cognition, drew heavily from Chomsky's original premise that understanding complex behavior requires attention to underlying generative structures. Furthermore, Chomsky's emphasis on universality had far-reaching implications for cross-cultural psychology. By positing that certain cognitive structures are universal, his work encouraged researchers to explore how mental faculties manifest across diverse societies and languages. This led to the establishment of comparative cognitive studies, which examined how universal principles of cognition might be expressed differently in various cultural contexts. These inquiries helped dismantle the assumption that Western cognitive models were universally applicable, leading to more inclusive and globally informed psychological research. In the realm of psycholinguistics, Chomsky's influence remains foundational. His theories inspired researchers to examine how language is processed in real time, leading to the development of sophisticated models of speech perception, lexical access, and syntactic parsing. Experimental paradigms such as eye tracking, ERP measurements, and priming studies have all been used to investigate whether and how Chomsky's proposed structures manifest during real-world language use. These experiments have not only validated some of his core claims, but have also revealed new complexities in how language and thought are intertwined. The debates Chomsky sparked also fueled healthy scientific controversy, which in itself is a sign of his influence. Critics from the emergent connectionist school of thought, for instance, challenged Chomsky's idea of innate rules, proposing instead that language learning could be explained by distributed neural networks trained on large datasets. Yet even these alternative models often use Chomsky's theories as a starting point, highlighting their central place in the intellectual history of psychology. His ideas continue to be tested, refined, and at times rebutted, indicating their persistent relevance and the fertile intellectual ground they continue to offer. Chomsky's own stance toward the mind-body problem also prompted new lines of exploration in cognitive science. He resisted simplistic, materialist accounts of consciousness, insisting that science had yet to fully grasp the complexities of subjective experience. This has encouraged researchers to maintain a sense of philosophical humility, recognizing that some aspects of the human mind may remain elusive without deeper theoretical innovation. This caution has helped preserve a balance between enthusiasm for empirical data and the necessity for robust theoretical frameworks. As technology has advanced, Chomsky's legacy has continued to influence cutting-edge research in cognitive robotics and embodied cognition. The idea that complex systems can generate language and perform reasoning tasks still takes cues from his models of mental representation. While newer theories often emphasize the body's interaction with the environment, Chomsky's abstract models provide a necessary counterpoint, reminding scholars that internal cognitive structures must still be accounted for in any complete theory of intelligence, human or artificial. To this day, Chomsky remains a vital presence in academic discussions, often engaging with newer generations of psychologists and theorists. His critiques of prevailing trends serve as a form of intellectual quality control, urging the field not to sacrifice theoretical depth for the sake of short-term empirical gain. His continued insistence on the value of a rationalist perspective, where knowledge arises not only from experience but from innate structures, remains a cornerstone of many cognitive theories. In reflecting on Chomsky's vast contributions to cognitive psychology, one cannot help but admire the breadth and depth of his influence. His ideas helped launch an intellectual movement that reshaped not just psychology, but our very understanding of the human mind. He reminded scientists and scholars alike that understanding behavior required more than observation. It required theory, structure, and a willingness to explore the unseen architecture of thought. In doing so, Noam Chomsky changed the course of psychological science, leaving an indelible mark that continues to inspire and challenge in equal measure. Carl Jung and the birth of analytical psychology. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, holds a prominent place in the history of psychology due to his foundational role in the creation of analytical psychology. Born in 1875 in Keswil, Switzerland, Jung was deeply influenced by his early exposure to religious thought through his father, a pastor, and his own profound introspections. From an early age, he developed an intense curiosity about the human mind and the nature of inner experience, which would later become the cornerstone of his life's work. His path toward shaping a new psychological school began with his early medical studies and subsequent specialization in psychiatry, where he found inspiration in the works of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. Jung initially aligned closely with Freud, sharing a mutual fascination with the unconscious mind. Their relationship was intellectually fruitful, and Freud saw in Jung a potential successor. Jung admired Freud's exploration of repressed desires and the sexual basis of neuroses, and together they collaborated and exchanged ideas extensively. However, despite this early alliance, Jung's intellectual independence and divergent views led to an eventual and significant split. While Freud emphasized sexuality as the primary force behind human behavior, Jung began to perceive the unconscious as a far more complex and multifaceted domain. He envisioned a broader perspective that included myth, religion, dreams, and symbols as vital expressions of the psyche. This philosophical divergence laid the foundation for Jung's development of analytical psychology, a theoretical framework distinct from Freud's psychoanalysis. Analytical psychology introduced several novel concepts that reshaped psychological thought. Among these was the notion of the collective unconscious, a level of the unconscious shared among all humans, composed of archetypes or universal symbols and themes recurring across cultures and epochs. Unlike Freud's focus on the personal unconscious, which comprised repressed memories and desires, Jung's collective unconscious pointed toward a shared human experience encoded in myths, dreams, and spiritual traditions. This idea was revolutionary and gave depth to the study of psychology by linking it with anthropology, literature, and philosophy. Jung's theory of archetypes brought further richness to his psychological model. These primordial images, such as the hero, the mother, the shadow, and the wise old man, represented fundamental human motifs embedded in the unconscious. These figures appeared in myths, religious stories, and dreams, reflecting universal patterns of human experience. Jung believed that recognizing and integrating these archetypes was essential for personal growth and psychological development. He introduced the concept of individuation, the lifelong process of integrating various aspects of the psyche to achieve a balanced and whole self. Through individuation, a person moves towards self-realization, which Jung saw as the ultimate aim of psychological work. Jung's exploration of dreams was another significant aspect of analytical psychology. He viewed dreams not merely as expressions of repressed wishes, as Freud had proposed, but as meaningful communications from the unconscious that could guide individuals toward greater self-understanding. He often used dream analysis in his clinical practice to uncover symbolic content and assist patients in navigating psychological conflicts. Jung's approach to therapy was deeply humanistic and intuitive, often relying on a patient's own symbolic expressions through art, fantasy, and storytelling. This method encouraged a creative dialogue between the conscious and unconscious mind, promoting healing and transformation. A key element of Jung's thought was his interest in the dynamic balance between opposing forces within the psyche. He believed that psychological health involved acknowledging and harmonizing dualities such as masculine and feminine energies, animus and anima, conscious and unconscious processes, and personal and collective experiences. The integration of these opposites allowed for a more complete understanding of the self and the world. Jung's emphasis on balance, symbolism, and spiritual insight distinguished his work from more mechanistic or reductionist models of the mind prevalent during his era. Jung's ideas extended beyond the confines of clinical psychology. He had a deep respect for cultural traditions, mythology, and comparative religion, which he believed held keys to understanding the collective psyche. He traveled widely, studying the spiritual practices of Eastern and indigenous cultures, and found parallels between their rituals and the inner processes he observed in his patients. This intercultural perspective enriched his theories and emphasized the universality of psychological patterns. Jung's studies in alchemy, astrology, and mysticism were not mere curiosities, but attempts to grasp the symbolic language of the unconscious, which he saw mirrored in ancient practices and texts. Despite the esoteric nature of some of his interests, Jung maintained a rigorous commitment to understanding the human psyche through empirical observation and personal introspection. He recorded his own inner experiences in detail, most famously in the Red Book, a work that chronicled his visionary encounters and symbolic journeys during a period of intense self-exploration. Though unpublished during his lifetime, the Red Book revealed the depth of Jung's engagement with the unconscious and underscored his belief in the transformative power of inner experience. His willingness to confront his own psyche gave authenticity to his theories and inspired many to explore their own inner worlds. Jung also contributed significantly to the understanding of personality through his typology, which identified key dimensions of psychological functioning. His distinction between introversion and extroversion, along with the classification of thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition as dominant modes of perception and judgment, formed the basis of personality theory that remains influential today. This framework was later adapted into instruments such as the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, widely used in both clinical and organizational settings. Jung's typology highlighted the diversity of human experience and offered tools for individuals to better understand themselves and others. Throughout his career, Jung emphasized the importance of meaning in human life. He argued that psychological suffering often arose from a lack of purpose or a disconnection from one's inner truth. Rather than merely treating symptoms, Jung sought to help individuals find their own path toward wholeness, often through a journey of self-discovery. His holistic view of the psyche embraced not only the rational mind, but also the intuitive, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of human existence. This integrative approach set analytical psychology apart from other schools of thought and resonated with those seeking a deeper understanding of the human condition. Jung's influence extended far beyond the field of psychology. His insights impacted literature, art, philosophy, and religious studies, and his legacy continues to inform contemporary debates about the nature of consciousness, identity, and meaning. Writers, artists, and filmmakers have drawn on his theories to explore the symbolic and archetypal dimensions of their work. The enduring relevance of Jung's ideas attests to their profound resonance with the complexities of human life and their capacity to bridge science and spirituality. Despite some criticisms and the marginalization of his more speculative theories in mainstream psychology, Jung's contributions have experienced a resurgence of interest in recent decades. Scholars and practitioners have revisited his work with renewed appreciation, recognizing the depth and originality of his thought. Analytical psychology has found a place within integrative and depth-oriented therapeutic practices, offering valuable insights into the inner life and the process of healing. Jung's emphasis on dialogue with the unconscious, personal meaning-making, and the quest for individuation continues to inspire those who seek a fuller understanding of themselves and the world around them. Carl Jung's intellectual courage, openness to mystery, and commitment to the psyche's complexity left an indelible mark on the landscape of modern thought. His vision of psychology as a path towards self-knowledge and wholeness remains a guiding light for those exploring the depths of human experience. Through analytical psychology, Jung offered not only a method of understanding mental life, but also a philosophy of personal and collective evolution. His legacy is not confined to a set of theories, but lives on in the ongoing exploration of the human soul, the search for balance, and the timeless quest for meaning. Lev Vygotsky and the Sociocultural Theory of Development. Lev Vygotsky, a Soviet psychologist born in 1896, is widely recognized for his profound contributions to the field of developmental psychology, particularly through his sociocultural theory of development. His work, which gained broader international recognition posthumously, challenged dominant views of cognitive development in his era, offering an alternative that emphasized the essential role of social and cultural factors in shaping human cognition. Vygotsky believed that cognitive functions are not simply a result of individual maturation, but are profoundly influenced by the environment in which an individual grows, particularly through social interactions and the cultural tools made available to them. The core premise of Vygotsky's theory is that development cannot be fully understood by examining the individual in isolation. Instead, it must be studied through the context of social relationships and the cultural milieu that surrounds the person. This concept diverged significantly from the ideas of Jean Piaget, another prominent developmental psychologist, who focused on stages of individual cognitive development largely detached from external social influences. Vygotsky posited that learning is inherently a social process and that interaction with more knowledgeable members of society, be it adults or peers, plays a pivotal role in a child's cognitive development. Through such interactions, children internalize the tools of thinking and problem solving, gradually acquiring the capacity to function independently. One of the most influential concepts introduced by Vygotsky is the zone of proximal development, ZPD, which refers to the range of tasks that a learner can perform with the guidance of a more knowledgeable other, but cannot yet perform independently. This concept illustrates his belief in the potential of guided learning and scaffolding, a process where a teacher or mentor provides successive levels of temporary support that help the learner achieve higher levels of understanding. As the learner becomes more competent, the support is gradually withdrawn, much like removing scaffolding from a completed building. The ZPD underscores the dynamic and collaborative nature of learning, emphasizing that instruction should be aimed just beyond the current level of competence to promote development. Vygotsky also emphasized the fundamental role of language in cognitive development. He regarded language as the most critical cultural tool that mediates mental functioning. In his view, language does not merely serve as a vehicle for communication, but also as a powerful means of shaping thought. Early in childhood, external speech used during interactions with others eventually becomes internalized as inner speech, which enables individuals to plan, organize, and regulate their behavior. This transformation marks a significant milestone in a child's cognitive maturation, as inner speech allows for more complex forms of thinking and problem solving. Vygotsky's insights into the relationship between language and thought have had a profound influence on educational psychology, encouraging instructional approaches that leverage dialogue and discussion as central elements of learning. In addition to language, Vygotsky highlighted the importance of other cultural tools, including counting systems, written symbols, art, and even social norms. These tools are transmitted from one generation to the next and are internalized by individuals as they grow within their cultural environment. According to Vygotsky, education is a means of transmitting cultural knowledge and practices, which in turn shape how individuals think and understand the world. This perspective has important implications for multicultural education and the recognition of diverse cultural backgrounds in the classroom. It underscores the necessity of valuing and incorporating students' cultural experiences into teaching practices to support meaningful learning. Vygotsky's work was revolutionary not only for its content, but also for its methodological approach. He advocated for a holistic study of human psychology, one that integrates emotion, behavior, and social context, rather than examining them in isolation. His research methodology often involved observing children in naturalistic settings, paying close attention to how they interacted with adults and peers during problem-solving tasks. Vygotsky believed that observing these interactions could provide rich insights into the process of development. Although his work was curtailed by his untimely death at the age of 37 due to tuberculosis, his theories laid the groundwork for a socio-cultural approach to education and psychology that continues to evolve and expand. After his death in 1934, Vygotsky's ideas were largely suppressed in the Soviet Union due to political and ideological conflicts. It was not until the 1960s and 70s that his works were rediscovered and translated into other languages, allowing them to gain significant traction in the Western world. Since then, educators, psychologists, and researchers have drawn extensively from his theories to design instructional models and curricula that emphasize collaborative learning, peer interaction, and culturally responsive teaching. Vygotsky's influence is evident in practices such as cooperative learning groups, dialogic teaching, and inquiry-based instruction, all of which reflect his belief in the social construction of knowledge. One of the enduring strengths of Vygotsky's theory is its adaptability across various domains of learning and development. Whether in language acquisition, mathematical reasoning, or scientific thinking, the principle that knowledge is co-constructed through interaction remains relevant. In early childhood education, for example, teachers use scaffolding strategies to support children's emerging skills, gradually stepping back as the children gain confidence and competence. In adolescent education, the idea of peer tutoring, where more capable students assist their classmates, is another practical application of the ZPD. Even in adult learning and professional training, Vygotsky's ideas are employed to design mentoring systems that foster growth through social engagement and shared expertise. Importantly, Vygotsky's sociocultural theory also brings attention to the variability of developmental trajectories. Unlike stage-based theories that assume a universal sequence of development, Vygotsky's model allows for a more nuanced understanding that takes into account cultural, linguistic, and contextual differences. This flexibility has made his theory particularly valuable in diverse and multilingual educational settings, where learners bring a wide array of experiences and background knowledge to the classroom. By acknowledging the impact of culture on cognition, educators can better tailor their instruction to meet the needs of all students, rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all approach. Vygotsky's emphasis on the social origins of mental functions resonates strongly with contemporary views of education that see learning as an active, constructive process. Rather than being passive recipients of information, learners are seen as participants in a community of inquiry, where meaning is negotiated through dialogue and shared experience. This view aligns well with constructivist and social learning theories, and it informs a variety of pedagogical practices that emphasize student engagement, collaboration, and reflection. Furthermore, Vygotsky's work has implications beyond the classroom, offering insights into how individuals acquire social norms, values, and problem-solving strategies through participation in cultural activities. In the digital age, Vygotsky's theory has taken on new relevance as educators and researchers explore how technology-mediated environments can support collaborative learning. Online platforms, interactive simulations, and virtual classrooms offer new opportunities for social interaction and guided learning across geographical boundaries. These tools can serve as modern equivalents of the cultural artifacts Vygotsky described, mediating cognitive development in novel ways. As learners navigate these digital spaces, they engage in new forms of social and cognitive activity that reflect the ongoing evolution of cultural tools. Vygotsky's legacy thus continues to inform how we understand and design learning experiences in a rapidly changing world. Despite his considerable influence, Vygotsky's theories are not without critique. Some scholars have pointed out that his ideas, while rich in theoretical insight, were often not fully developed or empirically tested due to the brevity of his career. Others have argued that his emphasis on the role of the more knowledgeable other may underplay the agency of the learner. Nonetheless, these critiques have often served to refine and expand upon Vygotsky's original ideas rather than discredit them. Contemporary research continues to build upon his foundation, integrating his insights with advances in neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and educational theory. In sum, Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of development represents a transformative approach to understanding how humans learn and grow. By emphasizing the central role of social interaction, cultural context, and language in cognitive development, Vygotsky shifted the focus from isolated individual processes to dynamic, socially embedded practices. His work remains a cornerstone of educational theory and practice, inspiring generations of teachers, psychologists, and scholars to recognize the power of culture and community in shaping the human mind. Though his life was brief, his intellectual legacy endures, offering a vision of development that is at once deeply human, profoundly relational, and richly contextual. Martin Seligman and the rise of positive psychology. Martin Seligman's name stands prominently in the annals of psychological history, not for reinforcing old theories, but for courageously shifting the focus of the field from what's wrong with people to what can be right. In the late 20th century, psychology had become overwhelmingly dominated by a disease model of human behavior. Most research, clinical practices, and academic studies revolved around diagnosing mental illness, treating psychological disorders, and understanding human suffering. While this was a necessary evolution from earlier, more speculative approaches to the mind, it left an imbalance. The field was heavily preoccupied with dysfunction and distress, largely ignoring the equally important questions of how humans flourish, what contributes to a meaningful life, and how individuals and communities can thrive. Seligman, an American psychologist and academic, stepped into this context and proposed a radical new direction: the scientific study of well-being. Seligman was not an outsider in psychology's traditional circles. He had already gained recognition for his work on learned helplessness, a theory which suggested that individuals who repeatedly face uncontrollable negative situations may come to believe they are powerless to change their circumstances, leading to a passive and depressive outlook. This research was rooted in observable behavior and biological responses and had important implications for understanding depression. However, Seligman began to reflect deeply on the implications of this focus. Was psychology destined only to analyze what broke people down? Couldn't it also be a tool to uplift the human spirit, to explore optimism, joy, resilience, and purpose? These introspective questions laid the groundwork for what would become positive psychology. In 1998, during his term as president of the American Psychological Association, Seligman publicly introduced positive psychology as a new branch of the discipline. His mission was to reorient the psychological community toward not only repairing the worst in life, but also building the best. Unlike self-help ideologies that often lacked empirical support, Seligman emphasized rigorous scientific methodology. His call to arms was clear: investigate positive emotion, character strengths, virtues, and institutions that enable individuals to thrive. He argued that true mental health is not merely the absence of illness, but the presence of well-being, meaning, and personal growth. What made this new movement particularly significant was its grounding in empirical research. Seligman and his colleagues began developing measurable constructs around happiness, flow, engagement, purpose, and relationships. This was not a vague pursuit of good feelings, but a systematic effort to understand what factors contribute to a fulfilling life. Using tools from cognitive behavioral psychology, neuroscience, sociology, and even economics, the positive psychology movement quickly took shape. Studies were conducted across cultures, professions, and age groups, confirming that certain patterns, such as gratitude, forgiveness, kindness, and optimism, had consistent positive effects on mental and physical health. Seligman introduced several frameworks that would go on to shape modern well-being science. One of the most influential was the PERMA model, which identified 5 essential elements of flourishing: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Each element, he posited, contributed to overall life satisfaction and could be cultivated through intentional practices. Importantly, Seligman emphasized that these dimensions could be enhanced not only at the individual level, but also within families, schools, workplaces, and even nations. The idea was transformative. Happiness and well-being were not elusive traits, but skills and conditions that could be nurtured. The educational sector was among the first to adopt these principles on a large scale. With Seligman's involvement, several schools began implementing programs that encouraged resilience, mindfulness, and emotional intelligence among students. These weren't just about academic performance. They were designed to equip children with tools to navigate life's challenges with a positive mindset. The military also recognized the value of this approach. Seligman collaborated with the U.S. Army on a large-scale initiative called Comprehensive Soldier Fitness, which aimed to build psychological resilience among troops and reduce the long-term mental health consequences of combat. Positive psychology also began influencing healthcare, where an increasing number of professionals acknowledged that treating illness alone was not enough. Seligman's ideas inspired new therapeutic approaches, such as positive psychotherapy, which focused on amplifying strengths rather than merely correcting weaknesses. Mental health practitioners began to integrate gratitude journals, savoring exercises, and strength-based counseling into their sessions, often seeing improved outcomes. These methods did not replace traditional therapy, but enriched it, offering a more holistic approach to well-being. In the academic world, Seligman's work led to the establishment of research centers and graduate programs dedicated exclusively to the science of happiness. The University of Pennsylvania, where Seligman served as a professor, became a hub for this new wave of scholarship. Students were trained not just in pathology, but in resilience, virtue ethics, and empirical measures of well-being. Peer-reviewed journals emerged, and conferences began to attract researchers, practitioners, and policymakers interested in applying positive psychological principles across disciplines. Despite its success, positive psychology was not without criticism. Some scholars worried that the movement risked oversimplifying the complexities of human emotion by overemphasizing the positive. Others argued that it might inadvertently marginalize those struggling with severe mental health issues. However, Seligman addressed these concerns by clarifying that positive psychology was not a replacement for traditional psychology, but a complement to it. He often reminded critics that acknowledging human potential did not mean ignoring human suffering. Instead, the movement sought to provide a more balanced and comprehensive understanding of the human condition. As the 21st century progressed, the influence of positive psychology extended beyond academia and clinical practice. Its principles began to inform public policy, corporate leadership strategies, and even economic development. Governments in countries like Bhutan and New Zealand began exploring well-being indicators alongside GDP to assess national progress. Companies incorporated positive psychology into their human resource practices, aiming to foster employee engagement and organizational culture. In this way, Seligman's vision began to influence how societies think about success, not only in terms of wealth or power, but also in terms of collective flourishing. Seligman's intellectual legacy is vast, but perhaps his most enduring contribution is his belief in the possibility of human growth. At a time when cynicism and skepticism often dominated the social sciences, he dared to ask whether people could become happier, more compassionate, more creative, and more resilient. He offered a framework grounded in science but driven by hope, a rare combination that captured the imagination of millions worldwide. His books, including Authentic Happiness, flourish, and learned optimism became widely read not just by professionals, but by lay audiences eager to apply these insights to their own lives. Uh, the rise of positive psychology under Seligman's leadership represents more than just a new academic trend. It marks a philosophical shift in how humanity understands itself. It invites people to view life not merely as a series of problems to be solved, but as a journey of meaning, connection, and possibility. It challenges institutions to measure success not only by output and performance, but by the well-being of those they serve. And it reminds each individual that happiness is not a static trait one is born with, but a dynamic process that can be cultivated with intention and care. In retrospect, Martin Seligman's courage to redefine the field of psychology at its core reshaped how science views the human psyche. Rather than dwell solely on deficits, he encouraged a vision of human life that included gratitude, hope, perseverance, and love. While many psychologists have contributed to our understanding of well-being, it was Seligman who provided the conceptual and empirical foundation that allowed the study of happiness to emerge as a legitimate scientific endeavor. His leadership bridged the gap between ancient philosophical questions and modern psychological inquiry, providing tools that are as practical as they are profound. Today, positive psychology continues to evolve, with new studies exploring the neurobiology of joy, the social dynamics of altruism, and the global implications of well-being economics. But the movement's roots remain firmly planted in the groundbreaking work of Martin Seligman. His contributions reflect not only scientific innovation, but a deep conviction in the potential for people to grow, heal, and thrive. As future generations of psychologists build upon his foundation, they do so with a clearer understanding of what it means to live a good life, an understanding shaped by a man who chose to illuminate the positive, even in a world often preoccupied with the negative. The father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud's legacy. Sigmund Freud, widely recognized as the father of psychoanalysis, left a profound and lasting impact on the landscape of psychology, psychiatry, and even broader fields such as literature, art, and cultural theory. Born in 1856 in Freiburg, in what is now the Czech Republic, Freud emerged from a modest background to become one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. His intellectual pursuits and pioneering ideas forged a new path for understanding the human mind, particularly in areas concerning the unconscious, dreams, sexuality, and personality development. While his theories have been the subject of significant debate and revision, Freud's legacy as a trailblazer in psychological thought is indisputable. Freud began his career in neurology, but gradually transitioned into the realm of psychology, where he introduced revolutionary methods for treating mental illness. He developed a method called psychoanalysis, a therapeutic approach centered on exploring unconscious motivations and early childhood experiences. This approach differed dramatically from prevailing medical models, which tended to treat mental disorders with physical interventions or dismiss them as moral failings. Freud's insistence on the psychological roots of neuroses and his use of the talking cave patient's voice and emphasized introspection and dialogue as powerful tools of healing. His work emphasized the idea that our conscious thoughts are merely the surface of a much deeper reservoir of hidden desires, fears, and memories. One of Freud's most significant contributions was his theory of the unconscious. He proposed that much of human behavior is driven by unconscious impulses, repressed memories, and unacknowledged desires. This idea challenged the assumption that people are fully aware and in control of their motivations and actions. Freud's concept of the unconscious included three key components: the id, ego, and superego. The id represents instinctual desires, the ego mediates between these urges and reality, and the superego serves as a moral conscience. This tripartite model of the mind offered a complex framework for understanding internal psychological conflicts that manifest in behavior and mental distress. Freud's exploration of dreams was another cornerstone of his work. In his seminal text, The Interpretation of Dreams, he posited that dreams are a form of wish fulfillment and a window into the unconscious. He introduced the idea that dreams operate through symbols and hidden meanings, requiring analysis to uncover their latent content. By decoding these symbols, psychoanalysts could understand underlying emotional struggles and unresolved issues from a patient's past. This approach to dream analysis was not only a therapeutic tool, but also became a lens through which to interpret literature, art, and myth. Freud's ideas permeated beyond medical settings and seeped into cultural critique, influencing generations of writers and thinkers. Another pivotal aspect of Freud's legacy is his developmental theory, which emphasized the role of early childhood experiences in shaping personality. He proposed a series of psychosexual stages: oral, phallic, latency, and genital, through which individuals progress as they mature. Freud believed that unresolved conflicts during any of these stages could lead to neuroses later in life. Though modern psychology has moved away from many specifics of this theory, Freud's broader point about the formative influence of early experiences has remained deeply influential. His attention to family dynamics, particularly the relationship between children and parents, contributed to the understanding of developmental psychology and inspired future research into attachment and personality formation. Freud's introduction of defense mechanisms added further depth to his theory of the mind. He suggested that individuals use unconscious strategies such as repression, denial, projection, and sublimation to protect themselves from psychological distress. These mechanisms serve to manage internal conflict and reduce anxiety, often without conscious awareness. The concept has since become a foundational element in clinical psychology, helping therapists identify patterns of behavior that contribute to emotional suffering. While Freud's original terminology may have evolved, the essence of these ideas continues to shape therapeutic practices today. Despite the groundbreaking nature of his work, Freud was no stranger to criticism. His theories were often considered controversial, particularly his views on sexuality, which many found unsettling or inappropriate for public discourse. Nevertheless, Freud approached human sexuality not with sensationalism, but with the conviction that it was a central force in shaping behavior and identity. He examined how social norms and cultural expectations suppress sexual expression, leading to repression and psychological conflict. This line of inquiry helped to destigmatize discussions about sexuality and paved the way for later researchers to explore sexual health and orientation with greater openness. Freud's intellectual legacy also includes the establishment of a new professional identity, the psychoanalyst. He trained a number of followers who would go on to expand, adapt, or even reject parts of his theories. Figures like Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Anna Freud each took different paths, contributing to the diversification of psychoanalytic thought. While these thinkers sometimes distanced themselves from Freud's more rigid formulations, they also validated his role as the originator of a rich and dynamic field. Even those who refuted Freud's ideas did so with an acknowledgement of their foundational importance. Freud's influence extended well beyond the boundaries of clinical settings. His ideas infiltrated the humanities, sparking new schools of thought in literary criticism, film theory, anthropology, and cultural studies. The notion of the unconscious, for example, became a powerful metaphor in understanding societal structures, ideologies, and historical events. Intellectuals like Jacques Lacan, Michel Foucault, and Slavoj Žižek built upon Freudian concepts to explore the intersections of psychology and culture. The application of Freudian theory to creative and analytical disciplines demonstrated its flexibility and enduring relevance. In his later years, Freud endured personal hardships, including a painful struggle with cancer and the rise of Nazism in Europe. As a Jewish intellectual in Austria during the 1930s, he faced increasing persecution. He fled to London in 1938, just a year before his death, leaving behind not just a personal history, but a body of work that would shape intellectual thought for generations to come. Despite his physical suffering, Freud continued to write and revise his theories until the end of his life, demonstrating unwavering commitment to his work and ideas. Today, the field of psychoanalysis has evolved significantly, incorporating insights from neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and other disciplines. Many of Freud's original theories have been revised, reinterpreted, or even discarded in light of new evidence. However, his central insight, that much of our mental life operates beyond conscious awareness, remains a cornerstone of psychological thought. Furthermore, the therapeutic framework he established, grounded in empathy, dialogue, and the exploration of the self, continues to inform modern approaches to mental health care. Freud's legacy is not confined to what he got right or wrong, but rather in the boldness with which he questioned accepted truths and sought to understand the human condition. He introduced a language for speaking about inner conflict, emotional suffering, and the complexities of identity at a time when such conversations were often taboo. In doing so, he opened new avenues for understanding the self and treating psychological distress. His commitment to introspection, even in the face of resistance, paved the way for generations of thinkers and clinicians to explore the depths of the human psyche. The enduring interest in Freud's work speaks to its profound resonance with fundamental questions about who we are, how we relate to others, and what drives our thoughts and actions. While his methods and conclusions may no longer dominate contemporary psychology, his influence is still deeply felt. Freud helped to usher in a more compassionate and nuanced view of mental illness, one that recognizes the layers and intricacies of the mind. His emphasis on the symbolic, the narrative, and the emotional laid the groundwork for numerous therapeutic approaches that followed. As the father of psychoanalysis, Freud's contributions cannot be overstated. His daring exploration into the uncharted territories of the human mind redefined how people think about themselves and others. In doing so, he not only transformed the field of psychology, but also left an indelible mark on the intellectual and cultural history of the modern world. His work continues to inspire curiosity, debate, and reflection, a testament to the depth and complexity of his vision.